March 2017, I got laid off from a relatively comfortable office job due to downsizing. They say the unemployment rate at the time was around 5%, but that's a big load of crap. Anyone who's tried to land a job in the last few years knows that the job market is bone dry. Sure, you can get a job at a McDonald's and there's nothing wrong with that. You get paid for honest work and that's respectable in my book. However, I didn't borrow $30,000 of student loan just so I could flip burgers at a fast food joint. I kept looking for a job in my field for 6 months, but I failed to land a position worth pursuing. By that point, I had to accept the fact that any job would do as long as I could pay the bills. After 8 months of search, I had 2 job offers to choose from. One was a basic data entry job in a medium-sized wholesale company. The yearly salary calculated to about $32,000, a far cry from what I used to make in the old job. The other offer was actually a janitor position, but as crazy as it may sound, they offered almost twice the money the data entry job was offering. The yearly salary calculated to about $59,000. However, it came with some peculiar requirements. First, you need a bachelor's degree, which I couldn't really understand. Why would you need a college degree to work as a janitor? Second, you have to work on site for an entire year, meaning you work and live at your job. You do get 3 weeks of vacation and you can use them on 2 separate occasions during the contract year. Third, you have to oblige to psychological evaluation. This is to ensure that you have the mental capacity to live in isolation for an extended period of time. I was told during the interview that the facility I'd be working in is in the middle of a desert. There's literally nothing that hints of civilization for hundreds of miles. The last clause is the much dreaded non-disclosure agreement. Once I take the job, I can't say anything about it to anyone. I really didn't like that. But here's the thing, I was up to my eyeballs in debt and I needed the money. The next credit card payment was coming up in 2 weeks. It was a minimum payment of $202, but I only had $117 in my bank account. I had to take the job. I passed the psychological evaluation, signed the non-disclosure agreement, and was off to the desert facility 3 days later. They flew me in on a helicopter and the landscape from above looked breathtaking. I was even more mesmerized when I saw the facility. The scale of the building was incredible. It was like watching something out of a sci-fi film. I was at awe but also intimidated by the sheer size of the thing. To think of the shape and layout of the building, imagine 3 layers of concentric circles as a building. The innermost building was the smallest in footprint, obviously, but it was also the tallest. It had no windows of any kind, with only 2 doors leading in and out of the building. Security was extremely tight. The middle layer building served as the main science area. I think that's the best way to put it. That's basically where all the scientists did their work. The outermost layer building served many purposes, such as cafeteria, library, housing, gym, and recreation rooms. It's also notable to mention that you cannot find the facility on Google Earth. The desert is photoshopped over it. In any event, once I made the touchdown, I was introduced to Robin, the team leader. There were a total of 102 janitors, and Robin was the boss of all of them, so she was my boss. There were 3 levels of janitors that served a different purpose. Level 1 took care of the innermost building, the most secure area of the facility. Level 2 janitors took charge of the middle building, which is the second most secure area of the facility. As for me, I belonged with the level 3 janitors. We cleaned the outermost building, the least secure area of the facility. We worked in different shifts every month. 1 month, I would work the morning shift, the next month, the night shift, and on the 3rd month, the overnight shift. We worked 5 days a week and the job was easy, to be honest. The floors were cleaned with machines and mops were only used to clean up the occasional coffee spills and whatnot. We used special type of rags to clean the furniture, and the dirty rags were machine washed in bulk. Initially, I wasn't aware of the cleaning procedure for the middle and innermost building, but our section was really easy. After 2 weeks of working there, I had 0 complaints about the job. The pay was good, housing was free, we worked in teams of 5 people, and everyone on my team were good people. Rooms were private and not shared. I mean, what could you possibly complain about such arrangement? But then I spoke too soon, because by around the 3rd week, I began having sleeping problems. And by the looks of it, I wasn't the only one. As I continued working there, during the months of the overnight shift, I would always see at least a dozen people in the recreation room hanging out in there because they couldn't sleep either. I thought at first to be because of the constant change of shift from morning to night to overnight. But it was soon apparent the reason for the sleepless nights was a bit more perplexing than that. We were all seeing things. For instance, when we closed our eyes, there was no darkness anymore. So at first, I saw streaks of lights comprised of different colors flying everywhere. It was as if when I closed my eyes, a really beautiful firework happened in my brain. Yes, beautiful, but a terrible sight to behold when you are trying to fall asleep. After a couple of days, I began to see the lights even during daytime. It was spontaneous and didn't last long. But from time to time, when I closed my eyes for a bit longer than usual, I could see the streaks of light for a split of a second. I spoke to the in-house doctor about my vision, and she simply dismissed it as me adjusting to the new environment. She also mentioned that having a vast array of electronic equipment in a rather confined area could make some people more sensitive to external stimuli. I'm not a doctor, but I got the vibe that she was being vague on purpose, as if she knew what really was happening to me, but she wouldn't tell me. After some time, I began relying on booze and Unisom to get some much-needed slumber. Unisom, by the way, is an over-the-counter sleep aid pill. It did wonders for getting the sleep I needed, but the vision didn't go away completely. I only fell asleep faster, and that's why I didn't struggle too much with the streaks of light I was seeing. One day, and this was about 6 months after I began working at the facility, Robin called me up to her office and told me that I was promoted to level 2 cleanup crew. I received a generous pay bump, and I was also really curious as to the kinds of experiments they were conducting in the middle building. I accepted the offer and began the new job from the following day. You enter the middle building with the use of a biometric scanner. The machine scans your iris, and there are 2 security guards at all times to check your ID in conjunction to the biometric scan. Once inside, the morning and night crews only clean the labs and rooms that are not in use. Then, at late night, the overnight crew comes in to clean up the rest of the rooms that were in use during the office hour per se. Clocking out of the building is a bit more complicated. You have to take off your work suit, empty your pocket, then the security people make you pass through 2 large scanners. When you clear them, you get to scan your iris again, check your ID one last time, and it's only then that you can go back to the outermost building. That being the procedure of the in and out, the working environment in the middle building was quite draconian. There's no talking in the hallways, and you're not allowed to interact with the scientists. There's one resting area for the janitors, and the room is creepy as hell. Don't get me wrong, it's clean and well kept, but it's just the way it's built. Everything is white in there. In fact, the entire middle building is white on the inside. The labs, at least, have science equipment that have different colors. But in the rest area for the janitors, from chairs to tables to the fridge and even the napkins are all white. The color itself is not the problem, but it's the uniformity of a single color that drives you nuts. It feels disorienting and not to mention distressing to be surrounded by a single color. We all felt like we were patients in a mental asylum. There were more peculiar things going on, and this was especially true at nights. We would go in to clean up the labs, and there would always be a supervisor overseeing our work. It wasn't so much that they were afraid that we would steal something, but the concern lied with us touching something that we shouldn't during the cleanup and also not going near some of the more sensitive equipment. There were other people who were trained for that. But anyway, sometimes when we were cleaning, there would be power fluctuations from time to time. The lights would flicker as if the power was about to be cut off, but soon things went back to normal. This only happened at nights, and there was this one night when the power actually went out for like a whole minute. I was in the hallway cleaning the floor when the lights went out without any warning. Then I saw the backup generator kicking in, and this was evidenced by the emergency orange lights coming on after the blackout. Only the backup power also went out after a few seconds. We were in complete darkness. I stood in the same place because I didn't want to bump into anything too expensive that I couldn't pay back. Some 20 seconds later, I began hearing painful screams coming from the hallway connecting to the innermost building. I could also hear security guards talking amongst themselves, something about the flashlights not working. Maybe another 20 seconds passed when what I could only describe as ghosts came rushing from the hallway connecting to the innermost building. Mind you, the doors were closed, and so they sort of melted through the metal doors. There were dozens of them, and they lit up the hallway like a Christmas tree. I ran toward the opposite direction as fast as I could, and that's when the lights came back on. Then right after, the ghost-looking energy beings seemed almost as if they were being sucked back into the innermost building by some sort of force that I couldn't see with my own eyes, but something was definitely pulling them back in. The security guards came to get us after that, and each of the cleanup crew were placed in separate rooms, locked and without being given any answers to what we had witnessed in the middle building. A woman whom I had never seen before came to interview me, and I later found out that among the 5 cleanup crews present during the blackout, I was the only one allowed to stay after the interview. The rest were taken off-site right away, and I didn't even get to say goodbye to them. I don't know what was different about my interview that led me to stay and continue working for them, but I must have said something right for that to happen. In any event, I was transferred back to the cleanup role of the outermost building after that, but they still paid me the same salary of the level 2 cleanup crew. Whatever they were experimenting with in the facility, I could tell they were losing control of something. The screams of those beings began to be heard everywhere at nights. The cleanup people began to quit left and right, and we couldn't fill the positions fast enough. Work became harder, people began to argue a lot, and by that point, the facility really felt like a giant mental asylum. On the night that I quit the job, well, it's more like the job had disappeared, but I'll explain that further a bit later. Most of us were sleeping when all hell broke loose. We heard the screams of people as well as the screams of those beings. There were power fluctuations, things were getting smashed, and alarm sounds were blasting through the speakers in the hallway. Most people managed to rush out of the building, but some couldn't make it out. Let me explain. As soon as I escaped the facility, the ground shook a little like it would in a mini-quake. Then these huge metal poles began protruding out of the ground to as high as the innermost building. Soon after, the entire facility was engulfed in electric currents. It looked like the building was inside a giant Tesla coil Faraday cage. People who tried to come out of the building after that were electrocuted when they reached the boundary of the electrical poles. Then there were the energy beings. They hovered around the facility, seemingly knowing that they couldn't go past the electrified boundaries. Some of them stopped in front of people and they just looked at us. They seemed angry, at least that's the vibe that I got from them. Choppers flew in after that, and we were taken to another facility right away. There, we were locked up and interviewed a dozen times over. It wasn't until a month later when they finally let me go. I had to sign a bunch of papers, which I refused at first, but by the 30th day, I was ready to sign just about anything that didn't involve me dying. I can't give you the location of the facility nor the name of the company I work for, but I hope you are aware that I've risked a lot by telling this story. I wanted to get the word out because there's a corporation out there that's doing something really wrong. I think it's something truly evil, and that something will affect all of us at some point in the future. I don't know what they have done. Do they have alien beings trapped in there? Have they opened the gate to hell? Because it sure looked like it to me. I don't believe they can contain those beings forever. The innermost building must have had multiple fail-safe measures, but I was there when all of them failed. For all you know, it's only a matter of time before the energy beings escape the facility, and then what? I heard the screams of people getting massacred, I didn't see it with my own eyes, but you really didn't have to understand that something horrible was happening to them. I don't know what you can possibly do to ready yourself against such creatures. But be ready, just be ready for anything. If I'm right, the beings will escape at some point. And when that happens, we might as well have built a bridge to hell. Enjoy every day like it's your last day. Take care of the things you meant to fix but never made time for them. Best of luck to you, and may God be with you. 6:30 in the morning, I wake up to take a shower and get ready for work. I finish the shower, get dressed, and drive off to the office. On the way to work, I begin to wonder why everything feels so unfamiliar. It's so weird because I know exactly what I have to do as soon as I wake up, and yet it feels like I've done something different to start the day on the day prior. I get to the office, park the car, and walk toward my building. But then my right hand feels light and I realize that I forgot to bring my briefcase. I turn around to go back to my car, but I don't see it anywhere. I press the unlock button on the remote key fob and I think for a second if I had gone mad. You see, I drive a black Nissan Maxima, but the car that just lit up is a blue Maxima. I go up to the car and sort of look around because I'm thinking it isn't my car. But oddly enough, I see my briefcase in the car, right on the passenger seat just as I had left it. I open the door, then open the briefcase, and sure enough, it's mine. It's another one of those moments that makes me doubt my own reality. I go into my building and walk toward the office. Right before getting on the elevator, I see a woman that I recognize. I swear to God, I made love to that woman at some point in my life, but I just can't seem to remember when and how it happened. I look at her, show her a little smile, but she doesn't see me even though I'm walking right past her. This woman doesn't know me. The rest of the day goes without a hitch, and by 7 in the evening, I'm back at home making dinner. I open the fridge and it's kinda empty. I hadn't gone shopping for about 5 days. In the fridge, I see broccoli, butter, eggs, jalapeno, meat, and not much else. I close the fridge and go to the sink to wash my hands. With my clean hands, I go back to the fridge to take out the broccoli, jalapeno, and meat, but when I open the fridge, I see that it's fully stocked. I just saw the damn thing to be close to empty, so where did all the grocery come from? First, it's the car, and now the fridge. I must be losing my mind. At any rate, I make a healthy meal thanks to the fully stocked fridge, take a shower, and then hit the sack. The next day, it's business as usual. Wake up, eat, go to work, come back home, and hit the sack. The same routine continues until Saturday, when I finally had the time to sit down and think about the things that have been happening to me. It was around 2 in the afternoon, and this was right after I was done cleaning the house. I made a cup of coffee and sat down on the couch with a note in my hand. I began jotting down the things that had happened to me throughout the week. At first, I couldn't really concentrate, but once the thoughts began forming in my head, I began writing down every little detail with obsession. I felt tired after about 5 minutes, and I wanted a sip of coffee. I reached out to grab the cup without looking, then suddenly pulled back because the cup should still be hot. I switched my attention from the note to the cup, and that's when I realized it was getting dark outside. I thought to myself, is it about to rain? And then I saw the time, it was 6 in the evening. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. 4 hours had passed, but here I am thinking that it's only been 5 minutes since I sat down. So then I picked up my note and began to scan the things I had written. To my bewilderment, I had only written half a page, and the contents of the writing, well, they were a set of items I had to purchase on Amazon. This wasn't the end of these strange experiences. Rather, I think it's only getting started. I drove to work the other day when all of a sudden I couldn't remember where I had to go or was headed to. I just sat there in traffic trying to remember where I was, why I was on the road, and how I ended up in a car that wasn't mine. It took a good 5 minutes for the memories to come back, and it was the most freakish glitch in the Matrix moment I had so far. Just imagine for a minute nearly all the information in your brain getting flushed down the toilet and you not being able to remember almost anything about yourself. It is a terrifying thing to experience. This has been my life over the past 6 weeks, and today I'm truly starting to doubt my existence in this world. I feel like I'm just a piece of code in a giant computer that's either been infected by a malicious virus or maybe my code has somehow been corrupted. It's almost as if this unfamiliarity that I feel about my current life is due to my mind still retaining some of the memories from my previous life. And if that's the case, then that also means that every person in this world are reprogrammed as needed and as often as necessary. You can call me crazy all you want, but I'll rebut that notion by asking one simple question. How do you know the memories in your brain are of your own? Really, just think about it. If you are a code in a program, then to change you from male to female or from white to black, all that needs to happen is some changes within the code and you wouldn't recall a thing of your former code. You would essentially be reset into a new being or the same being with different attributes. But you wouldn't know that those changes have been made in you. How could you? You are but some lines of codes in a program. Much like the Sims in the Sims game. I'm beginning to think like that guy in the Matrix. The character Cypher, the guy who wishes to go back into the Matrix as a rich and powerful man, he'd rather be happy in the Matrix than to be miserable in the real world. That's my mindset right now. If what I'm experiencing is a hint of the real world out there, I'd rather not know. I just want to go back to living my life without knowing any of this. I really do. I moved to Hammond, Indiana back in 2014 and have been very happy here for the last 3 years and change. On a Saturday last month, I went to a small shopping strip to pick up a few things the wife had requested. The time was 8:30 at night, but the parking lot still had plenty of cars in it. I went to several shops and got the things on the list. By the time I was ready to return to my car, the time was 9 p.m. So I'm walking in this fairly large parking lot about the size of 2 regulation basketball courts. I'm seconds away from my car when out of nowhere, lights start appearing in the sky. The first thing that comes to mind is a helicopter, and there would be a fine guess if there's only one light, but more lights are seen one by one as the seconds tick. I could see about a dozen people in the parking lot and everyone is looking up at the sky. This is a truly astonishing sight to behold. I mean, it made adults look up at the sky. How often does that happen? The lights are now surrounding a large area of the shopping strip. We are essentially inside the circle of lights up in the sky. Just as suddenly as the lights appeared, they become incredibly brighter in a split of a second. We could still see fine, we aren't directly under the lights. But still, you can no longer look at the source of lights directly due to them being so bright. Seconds tick by when my feet feels almost ticklish. I get down to one knee and touch the ground. It's subtle, but you can definitely feel a gentle vibration. That's when I feel a sound hit my body, and notice I say feel rather than hear. The sound can be heard, but you also feel it. It is akin to being hit by a sound wave. Then someone yelled, "Look, over there!" I get up to see it for myself, and what I see is an outline of something gigantic. I can't tell you what it is because I've never seen anything like that. It seems to be located on the outside of the circle of lights, and therefore it isn't clearly visible to the naked eye. I take my phone out and begin filming. Whatever it may be, it's about the height and girth of a 20-story building. I don't know if it's a building, a craft, or a creature, but then it becomes clear that it isn't a stationary structure because it begins to move to its left. I thought at first to be a freaking Godzilla-like monster, but now it's clear that it's smoothly sailing in the air. It's eerily quiet and no one's talking anymore. We can still hear the gentle hum, which also seems to be the source of the vibration on the ground, but everyone's quiet and busy filming the entire spectacle. Then all at once, the lights disappear like someone flicked a switch, like on and off in an instant. By the time I return my sight to the moving craft, it's also disappeared. So then I do what everyone else is doing and begin to review the video that I just recorded. This is impossible. How is it that I see only black? There's nothing on the screen. I go up to several people to check their footage as well, and it's the same deal. It's all black. They've recorded nothing but empty black. Some of the younger guys in the parking lot began to cuss out loud and laugh as if they weren't shocked at all. But most people were seriously scared. A lady suggested that we should call the cops, but an elderly gentleman had the perfect response for that as he said, "What are you gonna tell them? That we just saw the aliens do a mock-up invasion? Go home, lady. It's better to be home than to be locked up somewhere that isn't even on the map." Then just like that, we all dispersed, got in our cars, and went home. For the record, there were no news reports about the incident. I don't know if the lack of reporting had to do with not enough people having witnessed it or if there was a cover-up by the government, but nonetheless, there was not a mention about it on the news. As for my opinion on the matter, I wish I could tell you that what I saw was a concrete proof of the existence of aliens, but I'm afraid I can't say that with absolute certainty. The grand scale of lights was incredible. The gigantic craft-looking thing was amazing. The ground vibrating and the hum was truly terrifying. And lastly, the all blacked out footage was and remains to be a mystery. It is truly an incredible experience, and that's all I can say about it. July 15, 2015, I received a phone call that I never imagined that I had to answer. My boyfriend's brother was on the other line, and he had called me to tell me that his brother died in a car accident. Henry, my boyfriend of 5 years, passed away at the tender age of 23. It was the most devastating day of my life. The first year without Henry, I struggled mightily with life. I thought about him every day for the first month, but I began to think less and less of him with time. I felt like I was betraying him by moving on with my life. Every time I smiled or enjoyed something, I felt bad afterward. The guilt was making me feel miserable, and so I stopped hanging out with friends and doing anything that brings joy to my life. A year later, on the first anniversary of Henry's death, I joined his family and friends to visit him at his grave. We stayed there for about half an hour, and I was about to leave, when I could have sworn to have seen Henry waving at me from a distance. I couldn't exactly make out the face, but the height, stance, and the body figure screamed Henry. I felt my knees buckle, then felt Charlie grab me from behind. I said to him, "Charlie, I saw your brother. He was waving at me from the tree line. Did you see him too?" "Please, don't do this, Jenny," said Charlie. "My mom's still barely hanging on to life. I know this is hard for you too, but you can't say things like that around my mom. Please, we can talk about this later, but don't say a word about this in front of my mom," Charlie pleaded. I knew where he was coming from, but I wasn't merely seeing things. Henry was there. I could bet my life on it, but regardless, I conceded to Charlie's request and said nothing of it. As I was driving back home, I looked into the rearview mirror before changing lanes when I saw Charlie seated in the rear seat. I pulled up to the side of the road and turned around toward the rear seats. Henry wasn't there anymore. Or perhaps he was never there to begin with. I don't know, I was confused. It was the second time I had seen Henry within a span of 1 hour, and both times he disappeared seconds later. There was also the matter of a dead person existing in our own realm. It shouldn't be possible, but I saw what I saw. I was 5 minutes out from my place and I had made a left turn. Right away, I saw Henry standing in the corner of the street. But this time, he wasn't too far, nor did he appear for only a brief moment. No, he was there, and I could clearly see him. I stopped the car and jumped out to hug him, but he ran in the opposite direction of my apartment and I had to chase after him. I shouted for him to stop. I begged him to give me a moment with him, but he continued running at speeds fast enough so I couldn't catch up to, but not too fast that I would lose him. In only a few minutes, I was already gassed. I could no longer run, and so I sort of walked fast. Henry continued to match my speed, and I couldn't make him stop no matter what I said to him. I can't remember exactly how long I must have chased Henry, but regardless, I lost him after a long chase. I walked back to my car dragging my exhausted body. It took me something like half an hour to find my car with a traffic ticket on the windshield. I thought it was cruel. Was Henry angry at me for something? Why would he show up only to run away? When I arrived at my apartment building, there was a big fire going on right next to my unit. My apartment was also burning, but not to the extent of the one next to. The fire must have spread fast because it took some 3 minutes for the fire truck to arrive. It took them close to an hour to put out the fire, and in that time, I've pondered why so many bad things happened to me on that day. I cried more on that day than I did at Henry's funeral. 2 days later, the authorities had informed me of how the fire got started. The elderly lady next door had left the gas stove turned on, presumably for hours. It wasn't lit, and I could guess why. The stove in my own apartment had the same problem. I often had to turn the knob multiple times to get the fire lit. It was an old apartment furnished with just as old appliances. I'm not surprised an elderly lady could overlook the lack of ignition, leave the kettle on the stove, and forget about it since the kettle wouldn't whistle due to the lack of heat. Therefore, when the lady lit up a cigarette some hours later, the apartment blew up in an instant. Due to the explosion, I would have been in quite a danger as well. Upon being told of the cause of the fire, it became clear to me why Henry appeared to me on that day. He saw the danger I was in, and they tried to keep me away from my apartment. Some would say that I had imagined Henry and that the fire was only a coincidence. But I disagree. If what happened on that day is a coincidence, then it's only a miracle of another kind. I've been able to move on with my life from that day. I've got a new job, reconnected with my old friends, and I'm also seeing someone new. I'll cherish my memories with Henry for life, but right now, for now, I've got to make the most out of the hand I've been dealt. I'm enjoying life again, I'm happier than ever, and I still love Henry deeply. I was driving home after a blind date the other day and was stuck in a major traffic jam for half an hour. There was a huge pileup up ahead, and so the highway looked more like a parking lot than anything else. I shut off the engine and began nodding off. I didn't sleep much the previous night and was yawning throughout the entire date as well. My date probably thought that I was really bored, and I must have left a bad first impression. I woke up to a loud explosion, and as soon as I opened my eyes, I was blinded by fires and more explosions around me. I covered my face instinctively because of the windshield shattering, and the next second, I felt the driver's side window get blown up as well. My left hand was bleeding due to a shrapnel that flew in from the explosion. I didn't even feel it initially due to the shock and the adrenaline kicking in. I was gonna jump out of the car and make a run for it toward the side of the road, but then there was another huge explosion going off, and it literally pulverized the 18-wheeler a few cars ahead. Fragments from the explosion shot out in every direction, and one of them hit my forehead. I could feel a warm liquid flowing down my nose and cheeks. I honestly thought I was going to die, but I got lucky and it was only a deep cut. That was the wake-up call. I realized that moment I had to get off the highway somehow. I said fudge it and jumped out of the car. I must have looked like a crazy person because the road was fine. There were no explosions, all of the other cars were still stuck in traffic, and my car's windows were intact. I got back in the car and saw something impossible right away. I had a huge cut on my hand. Not only that, I also had a deep cut on my forehead and was bleeding heavily from both wounds. I used a napkin from last night's takeout order to stop the bleeding on my hand, but I had to use my jacket to slow down the bleeding from my forehead. It was pretty bad. I didn't know what was happening to me. I only dreamt of being in what I could describe as a war zone, and I wasn't actually there. It was a dream. How in the world did the wounds in my dreams transfer to reality? I was confused, scared, and shocked. Other than somehow my dreams having an effect on my reality, I had no other ways to explain what was happening to me. It took another half an hour for the traffic to move again, and I went to the hospital right away. While getting the stitches, the doctor asked me how I got the cuts. I couldn't answer him right away because I couldn't tell him the truth. After a short while, I awkwardly told him that I was playing with firecrackers. I don't think he bought it. The doctor suggested some minor plastic surgery procedure for my forehead. He said the scars would be really big and ugly. I nodded and took the number he gave me for the plastic surgeon, but I could care less about the future scars at the time. What I needed was to understand what had happened to me and nothing else. I still don't understand what happened to me on that day. Was I in a different dimension? A different reality perhaps? Believe me, I know how it sounds, but how else can you explain the scars? I don't know. I think it's futile to try to search for answers at this point. If it happens again in the future, I just hope I end up in a better place. Once is enough for any type of war zone.
Here we go.
The time was 2 in the morning, and I had just left the club before I got too wasted to even go home. My friends stayed behind because 2 of them had their eyes set on some guys, and another girl just wanted to continue getting wasted. I don't do one-night stands, and I'm not so keen on waking up in some stranger's apartment naked. So I left the club and was standing on the sidewalk waiting for my ride. I was out there for maybe a minute or 2 when a group of girls approached me from behind and beat me to a pulp. They kicked me, stabbed me with their heels, and one girl was hell-bent on pulling all of my hair out. I could feel the assailants were getting tired after a few minutes, and that's when I felt a sharp stinging sensation in my left arm. I didn't know what it was at the time, and all I could do was to protect my face with my hands. Then another minute passed when someone yelled, "Hey!" and the girls dispersed like hyenas fleeing upon seeing a lion. It was the bouncer who had come out after whatever he was doing inside the club. It seemed like he was about to chase after the girls, but he stopped when he saw my condition. I think he felt I needed an ambulance far more than catching the perpetrators. I was bleeding from my cuts to my face, especially around the eyes. The bouncer must have thought I got stabbed or something, but luckily for me, most of the injuries were superficial. I guess it would have been a different story if the assailants were male, but no, it was mostly the heels that did the brunt of the damage on my face. The ambulance arrived, I was taken to the emergency room, received 112 stitches around my face and neck area, but that was the extent of the damage. After I was placed in a room at the hospital, a nurse came in and asked me if I had gotten an injection in recent days. I told her no. She checked out my left arm, then told me she'd be back with a doctor. While I was getting the stitches, the nurse had seen a spot on my left arm that looked like a fresh needle mark. She wasn't sure at first, but I guess she felt she had to be sure. That's why she asked me about getting the shot, and when I said no, she instantly knew there was something fishy about the situation. If you remember the way I described the beat-up, you might recall I said I felt a sharp stinging sensation in my left arm. So when the doctor came to see me, she checked my left arm and told me that I have a clear mark of a needle. They did a blood work, urine test, and ran some other tests on me, but didn't find any unusual substance in my system. For what particular reason, who knows, but the doctors concluded that the assailants must have used some type of pin or needle to attack me. That was the end of that. I was discharged the next day, and my parents took me to their home instead of my apartment so they could look after me. I knew my wounds would heal, and I didn't care so much for the scars I'd have on my face. I had survived the attack, and that was the most important thing. However, there was one problem that I couldn't solve with my resolve. I couldn't fall asleep. Try as I may, I couldn't sleep for more than 5 minutes at a time during my overnight stay at the hospital. It was the same deal the next day when my parents took me to their home. Normally, I passed out in the morning if I didn't get any sleep the previous night. But I was wide awake even at 3 in the afternoon. Don't get me wrong, I was sleepy and tired like I had just run a marathon, but it's just that I couldn't fall asleep. I knew I had a serious problem by the second day of not getting any sleep. I couldn't concentrate on anything, my body felt weak, and I wasn't even hungry anymore. My parents took me to see a doctor in the afternoon, and I was hospitalized on the same day. They ran some scans, did some tests, and asked me many questions relating to the assault. 2 days thereafter, they still couldn't figure out what was wrong with me. By this point, I stopped eating solid food and my body began to shut down. My blood pressure was worryingly high, even though I've never had issues with high blood pressure. I could still walk, but barely. Whenever I stood up to go to the bathroom, it felt more disorienting than after getting wasted overnight. Talking also became an issue as I began to stutter and also had difficulty remembering the things that had been spoken to me just minutes before. My mom would tell me something, then bring up the same subject after 5 minutes, but I wouldn't remember that we had that conversation. By nighttime, I had lost the sense of taste and smell. Mom fed me some soup, but I couldn't tell what type of soup it was. When the spoon was moved closer to my mouth, I couldn't smell it either. I could feel that the lack of sleep was slowly killing me. Then day 5 had arrived. I was having microsleeps every few minutes and I was barely responsive to people. Mom would come closer and caress my face, but I couldn't feel her hand on my face. Dad sat next to me and began to cry holding my hand, but I couldn't feel that either. I had lost the sense of touch. As I remember, we had a few earthquakes on that day. Of course, in reality, there was none. It just felt like it to me because of the mysterious tremors I felt every once in a while. I also hallucinated a whole lot. I saw people flying in the air and nurses were somehow walking through the walls as if they were made out of nothing. I could spend hours describing to you every kind of hallucinations I've had. I saw cats walking upright like humans. It rained in my room as if the ceiling wasn't there at all. When the nurse came to check up on me, I saw that she had 8 arms like a spider. But not all hallucinations were trippy like that. Some were truly disturbing. One of the visions that really stood out was this ugly creature that I had never seen before. Not even in a film. It was skinny, tall, and overall had a humanoid figure. Its skin looked similar to an elephant's, so imagine coarse, dry, with lots of cracks on the surface. This creature would walk around the room and harass my parents. It was scary because they reacted to what it was doing. If it scratched my mom's neck, then mom reacted to that by quickly rubbing on the spot with her fingers. When the creature poked at my father's face with his sharp nail, he was startled by the pain and began rubbing on the spot as well. It just seemed so real. The creature did the same things to the nurses and the doctors that came to see me every few hours. They all reacted to it as if they could feel what this imaginary creature was doing. But the scariest moment was when the creature realized that I could see it. It stood at the foot of my bed and stared at me with pure hatred in its eyes. Then it came closer to me and I couldn't do anything to stop it. I couldn't move, talk, let alone move a finger. I was essentially paralyzed. The creature leaned over and looked me straight in the eyes. Then something came out of its mouth that was long and sharp. It was at least 10 inches long, and I imagined it was its tongue. Without a warning, the thing went right through my left eye socket, but I couldn't feel a thing. I passed out after that, and as it turned out, I had actually gone to sleep in reality. That was the end of the waking nightmares, and I could finally sleep normally again. The doctors could only guess that my temporary sleeping problems might have stemmed from the stress and fear. The truth, however, is that they had no clue. No one did. The 5 sleepless days were by far the scariest, harshest, and the most punishing experience of my life. I don't think anything that might happen in the future could top it. There's just no way. Everything that I saw and felt during the 5 days, I believe they were all in my head. People certainly weren't flying, and they weren't walking through solid walls either. As for the creature I saw, in a way you can say that it might have actually saved my life. Without it attacking me and putting me unconscious, I might have died from sleep deprivation. I think it could have been a creation in my head, something that I unconsciously knew would put me to sleep. The mind works in a mysterious way, you never know. I can't think of a single reason why I couldn't fall asleep for that long, but that happened. The needle mark on my arm, medically speaking, it had nothing to do with my sleep deprivation. How your brain can flip a switch and instantly turn you into an insomniac is beyond me. But as scary as it is, it does happen. I'm lucky to be alive today, and being able to sleep again is a blessing from God. I wanted to share my story because, as it so happens, cases like mine are literally 1 in a million. Today, I get paid handsomely to speak about my experience in conferences, colleges, and to medical scientists. Weirdly enough, it turned out to be a blessing in disguise. Sometimes, you really can make the best out of worse situations. The first time I remember it happening was when I was 6 years old. By the way, I'll explain what the it is as the story progresses. Mom had dropped me off at Uncle Patrick on a Saturday. I remember it because it was the day after my birthday. Grandpa was sick and Mom had to take him to a doctor's appointment. Uncle was 24 at the time and he was always cool with me. Anyhow, Uncle's best friend Marco was there, and so were 2 other friends whom I didn't recognize. They were playing video games, and I was right beside Uncle playing with his old Legos. If I remember it correctly, they were playing Tekken, and the players constantly switched because the winner kept playing and the losers had to relinquish the controller. Marco was on a winning streak, and while the players were being switched, I said, "Marco, why do you have someone on your back?" He turned around and said, "Yo, kid, you gotta get your eyes checked out." "No, I'm not lying. There's a kid sitting on your shoulder," I reiterated. But then he dismissed it as he said, yeah, whatever, and continued playing the game. 5 hours thereafter, Mom picked me up and we went home right away. 4 years later, on my birthday, I overheard Uncle talking to Mom about Marco. This was the first time that I learned Marco had died 4 years earlier on the day I was dropped off at Uncle's. They didn't tell me about it at the time because I was too young to be told of such news. With that said, that was the first time I learned that people thought strangely about my visions. This is where the it comes in, and the it is the little people I see standing on people's shoulder from time to time. I was the only one who could see the little people, and every time I saw them on an individual, that person always died. As I grew older, I pretended that I had lost the ability, if you could call it that. I didn't want to be different from others, and most definitely didn't want to be connected with death. Most importantly though, it made Mom very happy. It's not that she was scared of me, but over the years, she realized that my visions did, in fact, have a direct correlation with death. She simply wished for me to have a normal life. The years went on and my visions became more intricate. When I was much younger, I would see the little person on an individual only if that individual had hours to live. Today, however, I see the little people days and weeks before people's death. If I see the little person walking right behind an individual, then I know that individual has no more than a week to live. At times, the little person trails by about a yard. That means the followed individual has got roughly about a month to live. Therefore, as the weeks become days and days become hours, the little person catches up with the said individual to ultimately, I would see us standing on the shoulders right before death. I know what you might be thinking. You wanted to ask if I ever tried to help someone cheat death. I have, and it never works. I've tried with my grandpa, but I failed. But then I thought maybe I couldn't save him because he was too old and it was his time to go. So 3 years ago, when I saw that my friend was being trailed by the little person, I tried helping him. When Sean wanted to go hiking, I would tell him that we should instead shoot some pool. If he wanted to go to the shooting range, I would tell him that I could get us in at a discount next month. That was a lie, of course, but I lied to keep him away from dangerous activities to the best that I could. But it didn't matter what I did because a month later, Sean died of accidental choking. Of all things he could have choked on, he choked on an egg, a hard-boiled egg. He died alone in his house, in a place where I thought it'd be the safest location for him to be in. So as it seems, one cannot cheat death. Life hasn't been easy for me. The ability that I possess, it's a terrible gift. Imagine being introduced to someone and knowing exactly when that person will die. You see them all happy and full of life. They plan their lives thinking they've got 50, 60 years of life ahead of them. It breaks your heart to see the reality of them only having days to weeks of life to live at most. I fell in love with a girl once, only to see the little person trailing after her after spending 3 of the happiest years of my life with her. I quit my job upon learning of her eventual demise, and I helped her check off as many items on her bucket list as possible. 2 months later, after returning from our trip to Cancun, she died while running on a treadmill. It was an accident. She lost balance, or she may have tripped while running on the treadmill. But either way, she hit her head on the metal bar and then on the ground while falling down. She died alone on the concrete floor of her basement. So yeah, I couldn't save her. I could literally spend days recounting the tragic things I had to witness in my life. But what I told you so far, I believe is enough to help you understand what I'm about to tell you next. You see, I really hope I'm going insane and I'm merely a mad person imagining all these things, because I've been seeing the little people trailing almost everyone that I've seen lately. I see one behind me as well. It means the end is near for me likewise. It is trailing at a fair distance, and therefore my guess is that we've got months to a maximum of a year perhaps. I don't know how things will go down. Will it be a pandemic, a world war, or an asteroid? I don't get to know the details. I just know when people are nearing their death. If you're curious about the specifics, I see roughly 8 out of 10 people being followed by the little people. So simply put, about 80% of the human population will stop living at some point in the future. The timing of their demise is different from individual to individual. That probably means we don't get wiped out together simultaneously. You can take what I see however you want. I just felt that telling people of what I know was the decent thing to do. Whether they believe me or not, it isn't important to me. Whatever will go down regardless. And I had to tell you all to enjoy your life for however long you've got left. I, for one, have learned to appreciate life so much more than I had as a young man. Knowing that my time will come soon, food suddenly tastes so much better, time with family is so precious, and I want to love someone again before I go. I guess the point is that this is the crunch time. Make the most of it, enjoy it, and good luck. I moved to an old farmhouse about 2 years ago after spending 40 years of my life in the city. So why the move? Well, I had worked non-stop since graduating college. In my late 20s, I was in love with a man. He proposed 2 years into our relationship, but I said no even though I loved him deeply. Long story short, he wanted us to have a family. However, my ambition at the time was at an all-time high, and there was no way I was putting my career on the back burner to have children. My boyfriend and I, we drifted apart after that, and my career blossomed even more when romantic relationships no longer held me back. Fast forward 12 odd years, and I was working as a COO of a large corporation by then. I was extremely successful, made more money than I could ever need, and I was happy for the most part with what I had achieved up to that point. The only thing that was missing was a family of my own. My friends, though far less successful than me in terms of career, their lives were, how should I say, far richer than mine. Most of them were successful enough to afford a good living. They had children, husbands, and a wealth of memories they shared with them. But my life, I had money and career achievement in excess, but lacked in everything else. All of a sudden, my life felt so empty. I had no one to go home to but 2 cats and a dog. I found myself talking to my pets all the time, and I treated them like they were my children. But pets are pets. They are family, but they could never replace a child of my own. So I quit my job. I wanted to experience life differently. No more working around the clock to keep up with the competition. Stop making business relationships and start building personal relationships. Be closer to nature and stay far away from the skyscrapers and the insane traffic of LA. Hence the move to the old farmhouse in the countryside. Before making the move, I hired professionals to repair everything in and around the house and the farm. I also hired a top-notch security firm to build a panic room. The truth is, I didn't feel all that safe living alone in a remote countryside home. It cost a substantial sum to build it, but it was worth it since it gave me a peace of mind. Last month, so after about 2 years since moving to my current home, I went into town to grab some tools from the hardware store and overheard a conversation about a man who was killed by some wild animal. They said the man was killed in his own house, and his family would have likely suffered the same fate if not for them being out of town with their relatives for that weekend. After hearing that news, I went to the gun store and picked up 2 boxes of shotgun shells, even though I already had 8 boxes at home. Before moving to the countryside, I didn't even know how to shoot guns. But out here in the middle of nowhere, it's a must-own item. And also, I don't know why, but it makes me feel safe to have plenty of ammo in stash. I went home after I was done shopping. I parked my truck in the barn, which I use as a garage now. I raised chickens in a coop, but that's all the livestock I got for now. Maybe the barn will get to be used properly once I decide to get a horse. Anyhow, I walked up to the porch with the shopping bags in my hands. I was about to step onto the porch when I saw large claw marks on the wooden boards. They looked huge and was nothing like what a coyote could make. We have bears in our state, but they're not known to venture near our town. In fact, I've been told that the town hasn't seen a bear in nearly 5 decades. I called a friend who's born and raised in town and knows everything there's to know about it. He told me he was too busy with the farm work on that day and that he'd drop by the next morning to check it out. I said thanks and didn't think much of it until it was time to go to bed. I grabbed my shotgun from the gun safe and placed it right under the bed. It was locked and loaded and ready to pepper anything that would dare to break into my house. I was about to turn off the bedside lamp when I heard the window near the kitchen shatter. I jumped off the bed and grabbed the shotgun right away. I put the safety off, began walking downstairs, and my trusty dog was right next to me. I heard the sound of slow footsteps outside of the house. I could tell that the sounds weren't being made by a person. No, the footsteps sounded too substantial to belong to a measly 200-pound human being. I walked toward the kitchen, turned on the light, and right away saw something dark and enormous. I fired at it and hit it with 2 shells at the very least. The thing squealed like nothing I ever heard before and began smashing on the wall around the window. I fired until I emptied the magazine, but the thing wouldn't stop. Instead of reloading from the shotgun shell pouch, I decided to make a run for it to the panic room. I dropped the shotgun, held my dog in my arms, and ran with all of my strength. Once inside, I secured the door and dialed 911 right away. While I was making the call, I heard the thing breaking into the house, but it had no clue of my location. I don't know when the thing left, but it was gone by the time the sheriff had arrived at my house. Unfortunately, the sheriff only saw the destruction left behind by the creature and not the creature itself. As for the destruction, it was incredible. Neither my friend or the sheriff had ever seen a bear do such damage to a property. A portion of the wall in the kitchen was completely knocked out. The creature had literally broken in through the wall. Everyone around town tells me that it must have been a bear, but I had a faint look at the creature when I shot at it, and I can tell you it looked nothing like a bear that I know of. There's also the sound that it was making when it was being shot. The squeals, they sounded more like one that a human voice box would produce than a wild animal's would. It was bizarre. I've been sleeping in the panic room ever since that night. Now I'm considering whether I should sell this place and move elsewhere. You know, all I wanted was to live in the countryside and experience a fuller, richer life. I was so happy out here, but now I get to sleep in a metal box because of a mysterious creature that wants a piece of me. I don't know what to do now. I really don't. I was born in San Francisco and grew up there until the age of 9. I've spent most of my teenage years in Phoenix, went to college in Boston, and finally settled in Nashville after landing a job there. So, as you can tell, I've lived most of my life in big cities. However, I do get to spend about a month out of the year at my grandpa's cabin in the woods. I've worked at my uncle's company ever since coming out of college. We are very close, and I work extremely hard for him. For that, he allows me to take 1 month paid vacation leave every year. He knows this is important to me due to my past and ongoing medical condition. I used to suffer from depression starting from the age of 12. I consulted with doctors, psychologists, and was drugged up to my eyeballs. But nothing really worked, nothing permanent anyway, since the drugs for the most part artificially tweaked my mood. My parents didn't want that for me, so they sent me to live with Grandpa out in the woods. Grandpa lived in his cabin ever since Grandma passed away. She died from cancer at the young age of 47. Grandpa fell in depression after Grandma's passing, and living in the woods did wonders to control his emotions. So then he suggested for me to live with him in his cabin, and it worked out wonderfully for me. The only thing is, I have to go back there every once in a while. Think of it as me getting a recharge. It's probably hard for someone who's never felt in depression to imagine why the repetitive healing is required, but it just is. Grandpa obviously knows the woods around his cabin like the back of his hand, but I'm not too shabby either. Imagine, I've been going there for at least 1 month out of the year for nearly 2 decades now. The wild animals we get to see most often are deer, rabbits, squirrels, and weasels. The less often seen wild animals include beavers, bison, foxes, and raccoon. Bears, coyotes, skunks, and wolves are much less often seen. So you might be asking, why the lesson in local fauna? Well, to put it simply, the wild animals are disappearing from this area. This area meaning a particular county in the state of Ohio. I'm currently staying in the cabin as I write this down for you. At the moment, the woods are strangely quiet. I've only seen a handful of deer and rabbits. Even the squirrels seem to have left the area. Initially, when you come here from the city, everything is so serene and quiet out here. But that's only because you've been accustomed to the loud noises of people and traffic in large cities. In reality, the woods are much busier than the cities. There are millions of insects and thousands of different animals going about their day. If you stay quiet and listen to your surroundings carefully, the woods are full of noises and sounds. They're pleasant, unlike the sounds of the cities, but it's busy out here. There's so much that happens every day if you just listen. So then that's what's been missing here, and it's been missing for quite some time. Grandpa tells me it all started last year around July. He began seeing less and less wild animals in the area. Today, even the birds have become a rare sight. By the way, I'm saying this even after considering the seasonal migration of wild animals. I've contacted Ohio Wildlife Center, but didn't get to speak to anyone of authority there. I don't think they want to bother with some random guy calling in. An animal science professor at the University of so-and-so was more helpful in that he bothered to speak to me, but I could tell from his tone that he didn't put my opinion in high regard. By the way, I've decided to not disclose the university in question because I'd rather not put a bad light on someone based on a single phone conversation. In any event, I respect my grandpa's opinion a whole lot more than any professional claiming to know the area. If he says the wild animals are disappearing, then you have to take his word seriously. And it isn't just my grandpa who's saying it. Grandpa's friend, who's a park ranger, shares the same opinion. So do the local hunters and guides. Lastly, I didn't want to mention this and sound like a crazy person, but I don't think I can explain the whole situation without telling you of the strange things I've been witnessing around here. I've been staying in the cabin for the last 10 days. Out of those 10 days, 7 nights I've seen some mysterious lights in the sky. They are bright, but they don't cover a large area. The lights stay up anywhere from a minute to about 5 minutes. Also, they're not flares. I've shot flare guns plenty of times in the past. I know how they look and how fast they fall from the sky. Right about now, you might be thinking that it's another UFO story. But here's the twist. I don't think the lights have anything to do with UFOs or aliens. I think they are man-made. The reason for my assumption is the presence of the military in the area. We are seeing military trucks driving in and out of town all the time. I've also seen temporary military posts popping up in the middle of the woods. You know, tents and canopies which clearly belong to the military, and with military personnel occupying them. At first, they weren't too strict. You could actually go up to the soldiers and ask them simple questions like what they were doing in the middle of nowhere. It's not like they had answers, but they didn't refuse to engage you. But security has been enhanced in the last couple of days. They have physical barriers surrounding their camp, and soldiers are posted in all areas at all times of the day. Basically, you can no longer see what they are doing in there. And that, of course, is the reason behind the barriers and the guard posts. They're hiding something in there. Now, what I'm going to say from this point on is all conjecture. I want to make that clear to you. Imagine for a second thousands of wild animals disappearing from an area of over 10,000 acres. Keep in mind, there hasn't been any reports of those animals migrating to other regions. This is because a significant jump in, for example, deer or rabbit population would have easily been spotted by wildlife professionals in the regions affected by the migration. Based on the information I've gathered so far, I can only assume the wild animals in our region have essentially disappeared. So it begs the question, which happened first? Did the animals disappear and then the military show up? Or is it the other way around? Because that matters. If the military presence came first, then you'd have to assume what they have done has led to the disappearances. If not, we may be able to find the answers in nature. For the time being, it feels like everyone who could shed some light on this issue are willfully staying quiet. The more I think about the conversations I've had with the professionals in this region, the more it feels like they were told to keep their mouths shut. Abnormal migration of wild animals should be a huge deal in the scientific community. But have you seen a single article on this issue? Please send me a link if you've seen one, because I sure haven't come across a single piece so far. It feels like no one's talking about it because they've been told not to, but this is too big to keep it hidden for this long. It's almost as if the people in the know are intentionally censoring themselves. Why though? Is it because whatever that's happening is inevitable? And if that were the case, and for the sake of argument, let's just say that I possessed such inside information, would I then keep my mouth shut too if I knew something terrible was coming but had no means to stop it? You know what's scary? I think I might. What's happening in the woods right here, it seems like it's been contained, at least for the time being. But these disappearances are hugely concerning. The implications to the same thing happening in a larger scale should terrify everyone. I used to come here to treat my depression. Today, I'm not so sure this place can continue to be my paradise. I was dating a guy about 2 months ago. I met him at a restaurant when I was having lunch alone. He came up to my table, said he had to speak to me because I'm so beautiful, and that's how we've met. Things moved really fast with him. He was cute, funny, and I must admit, I really fell for his wealth. I've never dated a guy so wealthy. The Aston Martin brand was just something that my ex-boyfriends used to drool over. I never thought I would see one, let alone be driven in one. But I did get to ride in one because my new rich boyfriend owned one. Let's call this rich boyfriend Bill. He's not even close to being as wealthy as Bill Gates, but is closest to one that I know personally. At any rate, I stayed at his place for the most part of our first month together. We got physical real fast, and I think we spent half of our time together in his bedroom. I don't mind people judging. Oh wait, I guess I do since I'm talking about it. But anyhow, I don't normally sleep with a guy on a second date. As I've admitted initially, his wealth was extremely attractive to me. It's not like I was planning to marry the guy, but it's akin to fantasy coming true for a very average girl. So exactly on the 30th day of us getting together, Bill had a special night planned out for us. He took me to an opera. I always wanted to go to one, but never did. It wasn't what I expected though. I don't think I'm sophisticated or upper class enough for it. Either way, I didn't enjoy it. After the opera, he took me to a really fancy restaurant, one that I didn't know even existed. Then to cap the night off, we went to a beautiful conservatory. It was late, but the place was open for us. I think he pulled a few strings to make that happen. All in all, it was one of the most magnificent dates I've ever had. So as you might imagine, for a very average 25-year-old young woman, Bill is quite the catch. I wouldn't say I was in love with him at that point, but I was getting there fast. We arrived at his place late at night, went to bed after a quick workout, but then I woke up at 4 in the morning because nature was calling. Bill wasn't sleeping next to me when I woke up. I went to the bathroom, which is situated in the bedroom. By the way, the bathroom in the bedroom is bigger than the bedroom in my apartment. But yeah, that's not important. After doing my business, I stepped out of the bedroom and walked toward the living room to find Bill. Bill wasn't in the living room, but I could hear him talking to someone. It seemed like he was on the phone and was probably in the kitchen. I quietly walked toward the sound, but stopped short of revealing myself. You see, Bill was actually talking to the thin air, like he was having a full-on conversation. I obviously couldn't hear what he was responding to, but it sure seemed like he understood each and every word spoken by the thin air. I was going to turn around, put on my clothes, and get the heck out of there, but then Bill saw me and quickly ran toward me. I was actually very scared at that moment. I just wanted to get out of there as quickly as possible, but Bill apologized to me profusely. He told me he would explain everything, then sat me down on the couch in the living room. This is basically what he told me. He apparently can speak to spirits. He was that serious when he told me that and was adamant that I believe him, which scared me even more. He assured me that he wasn't crazy and that he couldn't hurt a fly. I, in return, told him that I just wanted to leave, but he said he couldn't let me go like that. I stayed calm, or at least as calm as I could be given the situation. I spoke to him openly about spirits, the underworld, and a bunch of paranormal things. I pretended to be far more accepting of those things than I really am. I could tell he had doubts about me. He's not dumb. He probably knew part of my behavior was an act. However, I think he wanted to believe I was okay with him being crazy. I spent 5 hours trying to convince him that I was still madly in love with him. I had to make him believe that I wanted to learn more about his supposed gift. Then the bell rang. The housekeeper had arrived. I casually got up and told him, "Oh my God, look at the time. Bill, I gotta get to work, We'll talk more tonight, okay? He grabbed my hand and wouldn't let go for a while. I think a good half a minute must have passed when his crazy eyes seemed to calm down a bit and he let go of my hand. I gave him a kiss, which by the way made me want to puke last night's dinner. I went to the bedroom and calmly gathered my stuff, all the while with Bill watching over me. Those 3 minutes or so while I was putting on my clothes and getting ready to go out, I was literally dying inside. I was so afraid Bill might go completely nuts. As I was walking out of the bedroom, Bill was standing by the door half blocking the entryway. I caressed his cheek, showed him a big smile, and slid past his body. The housekeeper lady was organizing some stuff in the living room. I was so happy to see her and felt like she was the only reason why I was still alive. I got to the door, opened it, but then Bill put his hand against it and stopped me from walking out. He then proceeded to kiss me with his tongue, trying to search for my larynx. I let him get lost in there for a while until he seemed satisfied with the search. I stepped out, got on the elevator, and could finally breathe again once I was out of his apartment building. I cried so much on the way home. I can't pinpoint exactly what it was, but I couldn't control myself. It may have been the rush of emotions I felt going from pure unadulterated fear to the relief of grasping freedom again. Or maybe I was simply crapping my pants. Bill's been calling me every day since the last time we were together. I already told him that I didn't want to see him anymore, but that hasn't stopped him from trying to get me back. I don't answer his calls anymore, and so he comes over to my apartment, then waits there for me. He's always parked across the street from my place and waits for me for an hour or two before he gives up. I haven't lived in my apartment for over a month. I've been staying at my friend's and I think I'll stay there for a little longer. I'm also thinking of going to the police now. It didn't occur to me at first because I thought he'd give up after a while. But that seems less and less likely as the days go by. My friend tells me that going to the police won't do much with a guy like that. He probably has got a team of lawyers who can get him out of many tight situations. Still though, I think it'd be wiser to at least leave some type of record against him. Maybe that'll persuade him to stop coming after me. I guess some people may accuse me of judging him too fast or harshly. To be fair, perhaps he was never going to hurt me. In his own crazy mind, he may just be a harmless medium. But unless you were there in person, you'll never understand how his eyes looked when he charged at me, grabbed me, then wouldn't let go. It was genuinely the first time I had seen the eyes of an insane person. It really was the crazy eyes. I don't feel safe anymore with him calling me every day and waiting for me in front of my apartment. I'm going to the police later today. Wish me luck, Dennis. I work security for a giant of a corporation. There are different levels of security in our company, and I work for the lowest level security detail. I can't name the company for obvious reasons. You just have to know that it's a massive conglomerate, and they dabble in just about everything. In the 2 years that I've worked there, everything's been fairly routine for the exception of one really strange thing. I met this guy named John about 3 months after I started working here. Some guy came into our building, he had an appointment with one of the executive officers, and I was ordered to escort the gentleman. The man that I was escorting was John, and this seemed like a genuinely nice guy. From the lobby, it takes about 3 minutes to get to the executive's office. In that time, John introduced himself and made some small talks with me. It isn't every day that these important people bother to even say hello to us lowly security guards. But yeah, I took him to the office, he shook my hands, and that was it. Until about a month later, I saw John again. This time though, he looked a little different. The first time around, John's hair was blonde, but now it was black. Sure, people could dye their hair to different colors. The thing is though, it wasn't just the hair that was different. You see, I went up to him and said, "It's been a while, Mr. Bryant. Shall I take you to Mr. So-and-so's office?" Right after I said that, he had this blank look on his face as he said, "I don't know you." Then he just casually walked away. Could he have forgotten me? Of course, yes. That part isn't strange at all. But what was strange was the complete change of his demeanor. The first time around, he was like the nicest guy ever. But then this time around, he was this stoic, hard to approach type of a guy. It wasn't a pleasant experience, but I said whatever and the day went on just fine. Fast forward another month and John's back in the building again. This time around, I hardly look at him based on what happened the last time. He dyed his hair blonde again and his face, well, looks friendly again. He walks right up to me and says, "Hey Gerald, how are you?" I sort of fumbled the words because I was taken aback by yet again the reversal of his demeanor. But regardless, I managed to say hi to him and proceeded to escort him upstairs. On the way to the office, I asked him why he had changed his hair color again. The response I got wasn't what I expected. John said, "Dye my hair? I've never once dyed my hair in my life. You must have mistaken me with someone else." At that moment, I thought I was talking to someone with multiple personality disorder. That is until I saw John again yet another month thereafter. This time around, his hair was brown and there were some subtle differences in his cheek and nose bone structures. They were tiny details, but I was always good with remembering people's faces. I did really bad in school. I always thought that I was dumb as a rock, yet somehow I could remember the faces of every single student I came across in school. And I don't mean that I remember them when I see them, but I can draw their faces after seeing them only once while passing them in the hallway. Which reminds me, I would be doing something better with my life had I applied my talents into something more productive than drawing comics. In any event, this was definitely John. It may have been John with a minor plastic surgery, but it was John. Also, as expected, he didn't recognize me this time. This experience repeated over and over again. I've seen more than a dozen different Johns, and the friendly John has come back a few times as well. But here's the crazy part of the whole thing. Whenever the friendly John came back, he looked exactly the same as the day when I first saw him. No hair dye or plastic surgery. It was the same exact John I had met the first time around. So you gotta ask, who the heck were those other Johns? How is it possible that each and every one of them looked different from the original John? There were subtle differences like say lower or higher nose bridge, different thickness of lips, different depth of eyes, and different sizes of ears. But they were all John, just different versions I would say. Call me crazy, but I don't think human cloning is in its experimental stage as the mainstream media wants us to believe. Because otherwise, I can't explain all those Johns. Yeah, I've said it, I think John is a clone. No, all the Johns are clones. If you think about it, it's terrifying to think what they could do with this technology if indeed it does exist. Just imagine, those who possess the technology could potentially replace anyone they want with their clones. Be it politicians, judges, police, and even you. Even a lowly security guard like myself could be replaced whenever and no one would suspect anything. Human cloning could pave the way for the means of perfect crimes. With this technology, I imagine a dystopian future where the critical personnel in influential places are engineered to serve certain entities. Power will be centralized even more than today, and freedom, well, given time, I'm not so sure they will remember the meaning of the word. Two weeks ago, I was deep in the woods somewhere in central USA. I was there to camp a few nights all by myself. I do this a few times a year. I go out in the woods alone and relish the time away from my boss, girlfriend, and certain friends. Don't get me wrong, I'm not anti-social. I've got friends, I go to work, get along just fine with my coworkers, and enjoy people's company about 90% of the year. I'm just one of those weird people who enjoys solitude. I don't want it all year long, but it's just kind of nice to be alone from time to time. Anyhow, I arrived at the spot I had camped on the previous visit at around noon. I set up the tent, built a little fire pit for the night, had quick lunch, and the time was 2 p.m. by then. As expected, being in nature was magnificent. These outings really clear up my head and makes me feel like a brand new man. Night came after a short stint of fishing, which was a failure by the way. I didn't catch anything. Even so, I had a pleasant sleep overnight and woke up the next day in great shape. I was mentally and physically in tip-top condition. I did a little hiking and then a few hours of fishing on the second day. Time seemed to pass real fast because I was enjoying myself so much. It was around 9 p.m. when I was getting ready to call it a night. That's when I saw a really bright light in the sky. At first, I thought it may be a UFO. I say that because the light was hovering in the same position in the sky, yet I couldn't hear the noise of a helicopter. I'm a huge UFO geek, and as you might imagine, I was really pumped that I might actually be witnessing a true alien craft. Soon after, more lights started appearing in the sky, and I could actually make out the shape of the crafts the lights were emanating from. It was insane because I was seeing crafts of all shapes. I saw the triangular ones, the round dish types, and the infamous V-shaped UFO was there as well. My mind was lost in the spectacle for a while, but then I realized I had to film this thing. I took out my phone and began filming. There was one problem, however. The camera on my phone wasn't capturing anything. It was just white, almost like what you would see if you pointed a flashlight directly onto the camera lens. Taking photos had the same effect. They all came out white. In that moment, I said fudge it, put away the phone, and decided to just witness the moment. A couple of minutes had passed, and the crafts weren't doing anything. They were just up in the sky and hovering. There was absolutely no movement. Then, just as it appeared suddenly, it disappeared in an instant. The sky was clear again, and the crafts were nowhere to be seen. I stayed there for 2 more nights, but the crafts didn't come back. When I went home, I thought about what I had seen almost every day. I wanted to know if there were actual UFOs piloted by aliens, or if they could have been some type of experimental crafts made by our own government. I'm not an aviation or UFO expert, but I've concluded that these crafts were neither UFOs or some type of secret government experimental crafts. My reasoning for that is this. The excitement of witnessing such spectacular event died down not long after I came home. When I was a lot calmer and myself again, I replayed the event in my head over and over again. And every single time, I felt that the crafts looked so fake. To explain to you what I mean by that, I think I should tell you to do a search on YouTube on holograms or 3D holograms. You'll notice that they look amazing, but there's no getting around the fact that they look fake. About now, if you are as geeky as I am, I'm sure you know what I'm trying to point you to. I'm talking about Project Bluebeam. There are many theories on what this secret program could be used for. Some say that it'll be used to create a new religion by discrediting all existing religions. Imagine showing the populace the arrival of God, a true God that doesn't belong to any religion on earth. The theory is that the religious folks will abandon their faith in their current religion, and the atheists will become believers of this one true God. There's another technology that will aid the conversion into the new religion. Low-frequency radio waves will be used to telepathically communicate with humans in an attempt to shape their beliefs to match those taught by the New Age religion. I'm not saying this is a fact. I'm merely describing to you some of the theories people have put forth on the internet. Then there's also the theory that the US government would fake an alien invasion, the end goal being the creation of the New World Order. The fact that we have a common enemy would unite us all, and we would happily relinquish some of our freedom to effectively fight off the enemy. Those are a couple of the more popular theories on the subject. Some of you may remember the dark skyscrapers floating in the clouds above China. Many have said that was a practice run for future events to come. I wasn't fully on board when the news came out, but what I had witnessed on the night in question has changed my mind completely on the subject. I think they're perfecting the laser projected 3D hologram technology. They may do test runs out in the open as they have in China, and I think some of the more complex ones are being performed in the middle of nowhere, just like the place where I was camping. I may be wrong about the crazy theories I've got in my mind, but I'm not wrong about what I had seen on that night. That worries me. It worries me a lot. Something strange happened about a month ago when I was on a flight to Italy from Michigan. The boarding process, the flight crews, the passengers, and pretty much everything seemed normal on that day. I travel quite often due to my husband's business. We've been married for 20 years, but he still makes me follow him everywhere he goes. On this day, I was traveling alone. I had to drop something off for my daughter at her dorm, and so my husband had to leave first. We made a stop in Dallas, and the layover was about 4 hours. Then we took the flight to Rome, Italy, and we were to fly for about 10 hours straight. That's the leg of the journey I'll be discussing here. I felt quite tired as soon as I boarded the airplane. The day before the flight, I had to drive 8 hours round trip from home to my daughter's and then back to my home again. I didn't sleep much on that day and couldn't get much sleep on the flight before the layover either. I was in first class and seated next to the window. With no one to bother me in my little pod, I fell asleep as soon as my head hit the headrest. I woke up about an hour later when they were serving in-flight meals. I thought about skipping the meal and getting more sleep, but my stomach wouldn't let me. Some 40 minutes later, and with my stomach full, my eyes shut on their own and I was in dreamland once more. I don't know how much longer I may have slept, but I woke up again from the noises inside the first class cabin. They were serving meals again. I was still full and there was still daylight outside. It didn't make sense that they were serving meals again. So I checked my watch and to my surprise, only about an hour had passed. That didn't make any sense. I slept at least an hour on each of my 2 naps and spent some 40 minutes to finish the meal. By that point, at least 3 hours should have passed. I called for the flight attendant and asked her why they were serving meals again. Her answer left me speechless as she said, "Are you sure it wasn't a meal from the previous flight? This is the first meal we're serving, ma'am." It took me a moment to recover from that, but soon after I asked her again, "Really? So you didn't serve meals about an hour prior?" She smiled and responded, "Yes, I'm positive." So I just told her thanks and that I didn't want to eat. Then she left. Nothing about the conversation I had made any sense. For argument's sake, let's say that the flight attendant is correct and they didn't serve any meals. Let's also accept that only an hour had passed since boarding the plane. But what about my full stomach? How do you explain that? I've had a cup of coffee in the morning but no breakfast. The flight to Dallas did serve meals, but I didn't feel like eating at the time. I bought a small bag of chips during the 4-hour layover, and that was all that I had to eat for the day. Aside from the imaginary meal I had on this airplane, I've had nothing that should make my stomach feel full. As you might imagine, I didn't want to sleep after that. I felt paranoid that I might wake up to another meal, and so I tried to stay awake, but to no avail. I was too tired from the lack of sleep and ended up drifting to slumber once again. I woke up again sometime thereafter and immediately lamented falling asleep. The flight crews were serving meals again and it was still very bright outside. I feared checking the time in that moment, but I had no choice. I flicked my wrist and gazed at my watch. To my dismay, I've been on board the airplane for just a little over an hour. The period of time in which lunch is served was looping in my reality. My stomach was also consistent with the time looping theory. I wasn't full anymore. I wasn't hungry at the time, but I definitely wasn't full. When the flight attendant came by, I asked her if the meal they were serving was the first of the flight. She said yes, I said thanks, and that cemented that something was wrong. I was still a bit sleepy, but this time I was determined to stay awake for the rest of the flight. I had the TV turned on, completed some puzzles, and also struck up a conversation with a fellow passenger in the center aisle. One of the pods was unoccupied, and a nice lady was seated next to that. Her privacy screen was lowered at the time, so I figured she'd make the perfect conversation partner to help me burn an hour or two. I managed to stay awake for the rest of the flight, and in much part thanks to the nice lady in the center aisle. I arrived in Rome safely, and time has stopped looping, as evidenced by me sending you this email. I told my husband about the happenings on the airplane. Predictably, he tells me I must be mistaken, but I haven't. How could anyone mistake napping twice on a flight and being offered 3 meals in a span of 1 hour? Of course, to me, the whole thing happened in a span of 4 hours, although admittedly, my watch did say otherwise. Strange, I know, but it happened. I know it did. When I woke up this morning, I thought I was still asleep and dreaming. You see, I live in a 1-bedroom apartment for the insane rent of $2,500 a month. That's the going rate for an average apartment in Upper East Side Manhattan, New York. I share the apartment with my girlfriend Gina, and we split the rent 50-50. I work for a design firm, I don't own a car, I've got 2 cats and a dog, and I suppose I have a fairly high income for someone of my age. That about describes who I am. I'm just a regular Joe who's rather geeky, loves Star Trek, and I love playing video games when my girlfriend's not around. Yeah, I think that about spells the plain old Desmond. The thing is though, I woke up this morning in a 2-story house in Connecticut. I was in a large bedroom, and the bed looked really fancy as opposed to the IKEA bed I had purchased for my bedroom. I honestly thought that I was dreaming. As dumb as it may sound to you, I actually tried to go back to sleep in what I thought was a dream. As if that would somehow wake me up in my own bed. It didn't, of course. I realized in less than a minute after trying to fall back asleep that I wasn't dreaming at all. I thought to myself, holy crap, did I cheat on Gina? And whose house is this? I stepped out of the bedroom and saw that I was on the 2nd floor. That's when I heard a woman talking on the phone downstairs. Oh no, that must be the woman whom I've slept with last night, I thought. I was in my boxers and shirt, so I went back to the bedroom to grab my clothes, only I didn't see my clothes on the floor or anywhere else in the bedroom. I had to go downstairs, and so I stepped into the walk-in closet where I found a bunch of suits, dress shirts, and neckties. I knew for sure the woman downstairs was cheating on her husband, and that was the guy she was doing the cheating with. In any event, there were some jeans and shirts as well. They were about my size, so I put them on and headed downstairs. The woman was still on the phone, but she walked toward me when I walked into the kitchen. Then she kissed me on the mouth. I couldn't believe whom I was seeing. This was Allison, my girlfriend from college. I was going to say something, but then she signaled with her finger for me to stay quiet. I was so sure that I must have gotten drunk the previous night, met up with Allison somehow, and now we are in an adulterous relationship. The person on the other line must be her husband. I sat at the table, waiting for her to finish up the phone conversation. She casually walked toward the island in the middle of the kitchen, grabbed a sandwich that was already made, and placed it on the table on a dish. She gestured for me to eat it and gave me the most loving smile I had ever witnessed. I felt guilty, ashamed, and regretful. I loved Gina with all my heart. I couldn't understand how I could have done this to her. I bit into the sandwich and leaned against the bench I was seated on. My line of sight had changed slightly to the right, and that's when I saw a picture of me and Allison on the wall. I nearly spit out the sandwich in my mouth because it was our wedding photo. I got up and ran toward the photo on the wall. I was now certain that it was me in the photograph. Allison was still busy on the phone, and so I walked toward the living room to search for more clues. There were more pictures of me and Allison. We looked happy. The photos seemed recent, meaning we must have gotten married in the last year or so. I was seeing all the evidence of this actually being a reality, but I still couldn't believe it. I must have looked like I had seen a ghost, because that's exactly what Allison said to me when she was done with the phone call. She quickly grabbed her handbag and the key fob for the car. She came to me and said, "Don't forget, we have lunch later. Oh, and also, you told me to remind you about the Hanson project. You said you needed more time for that and that you have to speak to the contractors. Get it done, babe. I'll see you later." Then she gave me a kiss and stepped out of the house. I stood in the middle of the living room, dazed and confused. I searched around the house for more clues to this life, and I was able to find traces of my life everywhere. The photos, my clothes, the shoes fit me perfectly, and my office was set up exactly the way I always hoped to have it designed one day. Even my PlayStation 4 had nearly the exact library of games I had in my, what I guess I should call my former life. I tried to find out what Gina was up to in this life. It turns out she lives in Manhattan in this life as well, and she has another boyfriend that she's splitting her rent with. In her life, I was replaced with some other guy. As for me, I'm still trying to pick up the pieces in this life. Allison being an ex, that is an ex in my other life, it helps with the whole getting to know you again process. But work is a little different. I work freelance now. As it turns out, I've got different set of clients to please and have to deal with bigger projects. It seems like the only major change in my life has been marrying Allison. Other than that, my profession is still in my former field. I've still got a complete collection of Star Trek in Blu-ray, and according to Allison, I still play way too much video games. I make it sound like all is great, but they really are not. I miss Gina terribly. I also miss my dog, cats, and even my apartment. I mean no offense to the folks in Connecticut, but I hate this place. It's so flat and empty, not to mention you have to drive everywhere. I remember the relationship I had with Gina in my other life. I proposed to her right after I finished my master's degree, and she said yes. We had problems though. I wanted to live in the city, but Gina wanted to settle down in Connecticut. This is the place where she was born and raised. She wanted to be here. I said to her that we both should make some compromises. I suggested for us to live in the city for 5 years and to move to Connecticut when we are ready to have kids. But Gina wanted to try for a baby in a year or less, and that's where everything fell apart. So how does this work? Did the other me decide that it was worth staying with Gina? If so, where is that other me? What happened to him? I also see the possibility of having dreamt of my other life. But I can't make sense of that theory. My other life feels too real, and more importantly, too lengthy to be a dream. How could you possibly dream about a 29 years of life rich with detail during an overnight dream? That's at most 8 hours only. I sleep on average about 7 hours. You can't possibly dream half a lifetime in that amount of time, but can you? I've read somewhere that time flows differently in our dreams and that dreams are portals to different realities. Some say that you can live a lifetime in your dream and not remember any of that when you wake up. How much truth can exist in such statement? I would have said 0 before all these, but I'm not so sure anymore. I can't talk about this to anyone because they'll think I'm crazy. To be honest, I wouldn't blame them if they did. I mean, I find myself wondering about the same thing every couple of hours. I don't know what's real and what isn't. I just wish this was a nightmare and I could wake up next to Gina the next time morning comes. I was driving to Mom's the other day to help her with some chores around the house. My dad passed away 5 years ago. A few days before he passed, he made me promise to help Mom spend their last years in the house the whole family grew up in. So now I go to her house even more often than I would have to clean the gutter, mow the lawn, check the basement sump pump, among other things. Mom tells me she doesn't want to bother me and has said multiple times that she wants to go to a retirement house. She means it, but only because she doesn't want to be a burden on me. Which she's not, so I just pretend I can't hear her whenever she says that. But anyhow, I'm driving on a lonely parkway and it's only been like 5 minutes since I left the house. I'm a rancher and reside in a remote area. I have to drive about 20 minutes on this parkway to find any signs of civilization. Also, this is the only road that takes me into the city. Otherwise, there's an old dirt road that was used in the 50s, but no one drives on that road anymore. I mentioned the dirt road because the parkway was blocked by a fallen tree. It was enormous and there was no way going around it. The parkway is carved around the side of a small mountain, so you can't really go off-road unless you want to plunge to your death. I turned the truck around and headed directly toward the dirt road. I drove there a few times when I was a kid, and so I figured I would find my way around. The road was somewhat spooky, or maybe it was just me chickening out. I don't know, but I did get lost a couple of times and that sort of kept me on my toes. It took me about an hour to drive out of there, and I was right back on the parkway. That is, on the same parkway that I was on, but roughly about the distance that I would have traveled in 15 minutes if I were driving on the same parkway. So after that, I went to Mom's, worked on everything that she needed for the week, got some groceries for her, then headed back home. On the way back, the entrance to the same parkway from earlier was blocked by a couple of police cruisers. I pulled my car to the side of the road, then walked toward the officers who were talking outside of their cars. I asked them if the downed tree had been cleared yet, and one of the officers responded. Tree? Yeah, there are downed trees, but it was a mudslide and there's a big mess out there. So then I told him about the downed tree further down the road, and the officer told me that he didn't know anything about that. He told me that he would pass along the information to the right people and that the tree should be cleared after they clean up the mudslide. I said thank you, shook his hand, then left. I used the dirt road to go home, and once I exited on the other side, I'm not sure why, but something was telling me to drive back to the spot of the downed tree. I did, and when I arrived there, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. There was no downed tree. I was in the same spot where the tree should have been. I've been driving on this road ever since I got my driver's license. I know this road like the back of my hand. I knew I was in the exact same spot, but there was no tree. And no one had cleared it either because every single tree on the side of the hill were intact. So I drove further down the road and found the aftermath of the mudslide. Road workers were busy clearing it from the other side, and that clearly meant they couldn't reach the downed tree even if there was one, which I found out just now there wasn't. The next day, I spoke to a few people in town to figure out around what time the mudslide might have happened. Chris, a farmer who lives about 5 miles east from my ranch, knew exactly when because he barely escaped it from the other side of the road, meaning he was driving from the opposite direction of me when it happened. I was never good at math, but it was easy to calculate that I could have been in the middle of the mudslide had I not seen the imaginary downed tree. What I saw that day looked real. Today, I know it was something that my mind had made up, but at the time, it looked so real, I even touched it. I don't know what really happened that day, but Mom wants to think that it was Dad looking out for me from up there. She and my sister cried when I told them of the happening. Unlike me, they are very religious. As for me, I don't really know if it was my father or just a coincidence. But I admit, it does feel like something or someone was watching over me that day. Otherwise, I might not be writing this story for you. I've always been a cynic, and Mom never liked that about me. But I'm starting to look at things differently now. Maybe miracles do happen. Okay, so I don't really believe in ghosts, but something happened recently that's challenging my beliefs. The other day, my friends and I were messing around with a Ouija board. At first, we mocked at the idea that one can summon spirits with a usable board that you can easily purchase on Amazon. but then one of my friends dared us to try if we were so sure that it wouldn't work. Everyone sort of hesitated to go ahead with the dare. I looked around for a while and then I don't know what got into me, but I shouted, "Alright, let's do it." We gathered around and followed the rules written in the instruction. Notice I don't describe the whole process in detail because nothing really happened. I mocked the spirits in the room. I said, "Show us a sign if you're not afraid of us." When nothing showed up after several attempts, I said, "That's right, I will send you right back to hell if you show up. At least you know what's good for you." And all of us laughed out loud, but again, nothing happened. I walked home with a friend after we were done playing around. I wasn't scared at the time, and I don't even think that I was thinking about the Ouija board anymore. I went straight to the bathroom when I arrived at home. I was sleepy, and I quickly wanted to brush my teeth so I could go to bed. I was about done brushing when the faucet in the bathtub pulled out on its own. It's not hard to pull the lever, but it definitely isn't so buttery that it will pull out on its own. It took me a couple of seconds to react, but I got the biggest scare of my life. I stormed out of the bathroom screaming, and my parents rushed out of their bedroom in shock. I told them what had just happened to me, and Mom was like, "Cheryl, I think you are a little too old for pranks like that. And by the way, it's not even funny." And they casually went back into their room. All kinds of scary thoughts circled above my head, but I tried to reason with myself. I kept telling myself that it couldn't be real, and that perhaps a sudden burst of pressure in the pipes could have pushed the lever out. I went to bed but kept the lights on. I normally like my room pitch black when I sleep, but then there was no way that was happening on that night. I woke up some hours later because the room felt cold. I opened my eyes and saw the blanket floating in mid-air. I was so scared that I couldn't even scream. That never happened to me. I had never been that scared in my life. Unnerving seconds ticked by when all of a sudden I decided to make a run for it to my parents. I got up and ran screaming from the top of my lungs. I rushed into my parents' room and I was crying uncontrollably. Mom and Dad finally realized that I was telling the truth. Although it only means they believe that I'm terrified and they don't necessarily believe that a spirit is haunting me. I've spent the last 3 days like this, with me constantly being spooked by the spirit. It never does anything when people are around. It scares me only when I'm alone. It's like whatever demon I may have awoken is shadowing my every move. I think it's time that I sought help. This is a legit story, and I'm not kidding. I hope you can publish my story first, so if any of your subscribers know a way to make the spirit go away, they can perhaps write the instruction down in the comment section. I hope you'll take my plea seriously and help me get some guidance. I'll thank you in advance. Location: shopping mall. Time: 10:30 a.m. On this particular day, my son was celebrating his 9th birthday. I'm a single father and I don't get to hang out with my kid as often as I like. My wife passed away when little Tommy was only 4 years old. My sister and her husband took Tommy in from that age, and they've been his legal guardians ever since. As for me, my job's located a couple of states away. I thought about taking a pay cut and living near my kid, but the pay difference was too big for me to make the move. At the time, I felt that saving money for Tommy's college tuition was the responsible thing to do. Although today, I regret that decision. My kid hardly even recognizes me, and no amount of money can make up for the lost time. So then it shouldn't be a surprise that my son wasn't all that excited to hang out with me. My sister was throwing a party for him in the afternoon, and he was definitely looking forward to that. But hanging out with me was kind of a chore for him. We bought some new clothes and had some snacks in the cafeteria. But it didn't seem like Tommy was having fun. It was only when we stopped by GameStop that he seemed genuinely happy. I couldn't make him smile no matter what I did, but Nintendo Switch effortlessly drew a smile on his face. I stood by the entrance and just looked at him blissfully checking out the games on the shelves. It wasn't me who was making him happy, but regardless, I was content seeing him like that. Then for a moment, he went behind the display shelves and I couldn't see him anymore. I went and followed him there, but Tommy wasn't there. I looked around the store, called for him, but got no answer. I stepped out of the store, but still not a sight of him. I went back inside and asked the cashier if he had seen a kid of Tommy's description. All the other persons in the store were either teenagers or adults, so there was no reason for confusion. The cashier said he hadn't seen any child. Then the cashier got the mall security for me and they told me to stay in front of the store while they try to find Tommy. Tommy was nowhere to be found and we ended up calling the police. When the police arrived, they began reviewing the security footage. In the meantime, I called my sister and told her about the situation. But I got the most unexpected response from her. She told me that I didn't have a kid, that there was no Tommy in my life. I argued with her on the phone and told her she was out of her mind. She kept telling me to stay at the mall and that she'd be here soon. But before she arrived, the cops had me in a handcuff for making a false report. The security footage in the mall didn't show any child with me. I had walked in on my own. My sister came to get me at the police station sometime later. She explained to them that I'm a former ranger who saw combat and has PTSD. She and my therapist on the phone got him to email some documents and got me off with a warning. I was lucky that the ranking officer was a former ranger himself. He must have felt bad for me and probably did me a huge favor by cutting me loose with only a warning. Here's the problem though. I really was with my kid in the shopping mall that morning. I did have PTSD, but that was years ago when I came back from Afghanistan. The documents my sister showed me does say that I still have PTSD, and my therapist tells me that I still see him on a regular basis. But that's not how I remember things. I had a serious case of PTSD right after I came home for good. The first year was awful. I got better in the second year, and by the third year, I was no longer seeing the therapist. And then there's Tommy. I'm told he's a figment of my imagination. My therapist tells me that I made him up with my mind. He says that my wife is actually my fiancée who died in a car accident while I was stationed in Iraq. My friend died in a combat around the same time, and I do remember that, but not the part about my fiancée's death. All the evidence support the fact that I have a serious case of PTSD, but I have these memories of my wife and child that feel so real to me. I still can't forget that morning when I saw that big smile on Tommy's face as he walked into the video game store. If I truly have PTSD, then it's getting worse. Lately, I've been having difficulties differentiating dreams to reality. I wake up in the morning, but I'm never quite sure if I'm really up. Right now, this moment, as I type all these information, I'm fairly certain that I'm awake, but I wouldn't bet my life on it. The most terrible thing about the whole situation is the fact that I miss Tommy so very much. People can tell me whatever they want, but my son is as real to me as is the ground you and everyone else stands on. I'd be grateful if this was a nightmare I could wake up from. I go to bed every night hoping that's the case. Perhaps this whole world is only a figment of my imagination. I had this girlfriend who was just the loveliest person you can imagine. I won't bore you with the details of how we met and fell in love, but suffice it to say, for a time Jennifer was the best thing that had happened to me in a long while. I didn't notice it then, but her peculiar behavior was in clear display from the first time she stayed at my place. I was sleeping when I was woken up by her crying. She was balled up right next to me and crying for some reason. I panicked at first because that was the first night that we did it. It's never a great sign to see your girlfriend cry after making love for the first time. I asked her why she was crying and if I had done something to upset her. Jennifer's answer was unexpected but oddly cute. She said, "I'm just so happy that I met you. I always meet the wrong guys and end up getting hurt, but you're not like that." I thought that was adorable and I fell for her even more after that night. The problem started when she began to show her true colors. It wasn't anything that would make me consider breaking up with her, but I was getting stressed over how clingy she was. I, like most everyone else, like to do some of the activities with my friends without the presence of my girlfriend. That's normally not a problem since all of my ex-girlfriends had their own friends. We would schedule nights when we'd hang out with different groups and meet up again after the night was over. With Jennifer though, it didn't seem like she had any friends. Once she started staying at my place for the most part of the week, I never saw her go out with her friends. I would often try to set things up with my friends that we can do as couples, but there were nights when the guys wanted us to hang out without the girls, and those nights I had to leave Jennifer at home on her own. When I would come home after hanging out, she was angry at first, but then as those nights repeated, I would find her at home crying when I come back. I felt something must have happened to her in the past that was still tormenting her. I wanted to find out what it was, but as I mentioned before, she had no friends that I can speak to. As the days went on, her neediness became unbearable. She quit her job and stayed at home. In fact, I'm not sure that she had a job to begin with. She got mad at me for going to work and would try to stop me from going out using sex as her weapon of choice. I admit it worked the first time she tried, but that wasn't going to repeat. I wasn't going to lose my job to satisfy my lust every morning. She got worse as the days went on. The mood changes were a nightmare to deal with. Imagine your girlfriend being really nice to you 1 minute, then you leave her for maximum 2 minutes to answer a phone call, and when you come back, she starts hitting you like you owe her money. The final straw that broke the camel's back was her swinging a knife at me. I went to visit my sister on a Friday night, then came back home on Sunday. I told Jennifer to find something to do over the weekend and that she should try to spend some time in her own place. She didn't listen. When I came back, Jennifer was seated on the floor of the living room. Something felt off about the whole situation, so I first went to the kitchen and put a wall between me and Jennifer. There, I took out my cell phone and began recording the audio before talking to her. I cautiously approached her and asked if she was okay. She got up and looked me in the eyes with so much hatred. I could tell she was crying, her makeup was all over her face, and her eyes were swollen. She also smelled awful. Without a doubt, she hadn't taken a shower since I left. I was going to grab her hand to take her to the bathroom, but then my body sort of reacted before I could even think because I pushed my hips to the rear when she swung a knife at my abdomen. I ran toward the hallway, then grabbed the coat hanger to defend myself. I tried to calm her down as I said, "Jennifer, we can talk about this. You don't have to do this." She didn't listen. She continued to attack me, and as much as I tried to defend myself without hurting her, I was slowly running out of room to back away. I had no choice. I knocked her out with 3 heavy hits with the coat hanger and called 911 right away. I tied her wrist with my shoelace before the police arrived. When the police knocked on the door, Jennifer began to scream and cry to the police for help. She had already regained consciousness in between the time I tied her up and the police arriving. She was waiting for the perfect time to play a victim. I opened the door and the cops rushed at me without even knowing what exactly was happening. They cuffed me, read my rights, and as that was happening, I told them that Jennifer's the one who attacked me. I repeated over and over that I had the audio recording of the attack still being recorded in my pocket. I begged them to stop the recording and make sure it was saved, but they wouldn't listen. Eventually though, they checked my pockets for weapons and found a cell phone in my jacket. Fortunately for me, the audio recording was saved and was clear enough to clear me of all suspicion. Unfortunately, however, Jennifer got off clean. She somehow convinced the judge that we had an argument that got out of hand. The male judge ate it up like a sweet candy and let the conniving snake go without even a slap on the wrist. She's been talking to some of my friends on Facebook and insinuating that I have a violent tendency. My friends tell me they no longer talk to her and that they believe me, but I can see the uncertainties in their eyes. We as a society, myself included, truly despise men who hit women, and rightfully so. But no matter how heinous the accused crime may be, presumption of innocence should always be valid, meaning the burden of proof is on the one who declares and not one who denies. Innocence until proven guilty should apply to any and all charged offenses. But I've learned that isn't how things work when it comes to domestic violence. You could possess a solid proof to clear your name, and you might be declared innocent in a court of law. That should set you free and you should have your life back. But in reality, that's not how things work. Today, I'm still fighting the fight to clear my name. I had to meet up with each of my friends to have them listen to the audio recording of the assault. It is unfair that I have to prove my innocence even after successfully defending myself in a court of law. It's humiliating that even with the audio recording, some of my friends would rather not be associated with me because somehow my name has already been tarnished. I go to work nowadays and notice how everyone tries to avoid me. It's incredible how fast rumors spread and how everyone adds a lie or two to their own version of the story. This nightmare and much worse is what a real abuser should deserve. But not me, not the person who's innocent and cleared of all charges. Yesterday when I came home, I found a note slipped underneath the door. It was a letter made using the alphabets from different magazines, exactly like the ones you see in horror films. I didn't hold the letter so as not to contaminate the evidence. The gist of the letter is this: I want you back, you should want me back too, because if not, what you are going through right now should seem like a pleasant stroll around the park. I had my sister, who's a lawyer, take the letter and have it examined. She hired a professional to have it analyzed, and nothing came of it. The letter was clean. It was crafted carefully to not leave any fingerprints. I'm thinking of quitting my job and going overseas for a few years. I had a good life and the future I could look forward to, but not anymore. At least not in the stateside. Man or woman, it only takes one bad relationship to have your life ruined for good. I don't know that I could ever be part of a meaningful relationship. Jennifer's drained my life of all hopes. My life is in ruins. The time was around 10:30 at night, and I was at the gym getting ready to go home after a workout. I stepped out of the gym after saying goodbye to Mandy, a nice lady who works there. As soon as I stepped out, something about the streets just didn't feel right. I stood in front of the gym, surveying the area. The sidewalk was way too clean, the streetlights had different designs from the ones I'm familiar with, and the buildings and cars looked futuristic. I turned around to go back inside the gym, but it was gone. Some kind of building was still there, but it wasn't the gym. You know how in the films when characters see something strange or incredible, they often close their eyes, then open, or they would rub their eyes as if they would clear their visions? Well, I did exactly that. I wasn't even thinking when I did that. I just reacted to the situation because I really couldn't believe what I was seeing. Moments like that, you truly begin to question your sanity. Think about it. You have the proof of a different world right in front of your eyes, and yet the memories in your brain tells you that this shouldn't be, that you are in fact in a place where you don't belong. I had no choice but to walk toward my apartment. The layout of the streets looked to be the same, even though everything on it looked unfamiliar. On the way home, I saw a few people on the streets and noticed they looked different. I don't mean that they had 6 arms and 4 legs. No, nothing that drastic. But it was mainly the fashion and hairstyle that stood out. It's hard to explain, but they looked very much like the people that you will see in Hollywood films of the 40s perhaps. I say it's hard to explain because they also looked very modern. It was akin to seeing a fusion of the retro and futuristic style. I don't know if that makes any sense, but that's the best I can do. The women who passed by me looked at me strangely. I thought perhaps they found my fashion to be odd, and so I inspected my clothes. I should have been wearing a hoodies and a pair of sweatpants, but to my dismay, I was in the same style of wardrobe the ladies were wearing. I was in such a shock that I didn't even know that even my clothes had been changed somehow. As I was getting closer to home, I reached into my pocket to find the keys to my apartment. I grabbed something, but it wasn't the keys. I took it out of my pocket and saw a thin plastic strip that looked like a miniature credit card. It was connected to a small metallic bar that had some heft to it. I looked at it and wondered which one of the two strange items could be the key and which one was the keychain. Is it the plastic or the metal? When I arrived at my apartment, or at least where my apartment is supposed to be, there was a building and an entrance to the building not much different from what we know. I inspected the door and the area right next to the entrance, but I couldn't find any hole where I could insert a key. I had nowhere else to go, and by the way, my cell phone had disappeared. I had it in my pocket when I got out of the gym, but it was gone when I was checking my pockets for the keys. Hence, I could call no one for help, not that I think the cell phone would work anyway, but regardless. I reached for the doorknob and twisted it. To my surprise, it opened. I figured either the plastic strip or the metal bar was working like a keyless entry system would in a car. I entered the lobby and headed toward the elevator. Then, without me pressing on any button, the elevator called for the carriage on its own. It arrived shortly thereafter, and soon I was standing in front of my unit. I stood there for a while, imagining all kinds of different scenarios. What if the door doesn't open? Could someone be inside? What do I do next if the door does open? How in the world am I gonna continue living in this world? I was scared, I was panicking, and I couldn't believe I was actually stuck in this ludicrous situation. I think I could have been standing there for hours had it not been for the sound of the elevator door opening from the far end of the hallway. I didn't want to bump into anyone else, so I just opened the door, then entered. As I walked through the doorway, I could see the changes happening all around me. It was akin to seeing my own reality being painted over the alternate reality I was stuck in. I actually saw the changes. It was fast, but not fast enough that the naked eye would miss it. If I had to time the whole event, I would say that the changes took place inside 5 seconds of time. I was now back in my own reality. I felt relieved, so much so that my legs were shaking and I was almost crying. After regaining my composure, I checked all around the apartment to make sure that I was truly back to where I belong. Nothing seemed out of place, and I was 99% certain I was in the correct reality. I've been doing lots of reading regarding this subject, and as it turns out, people can imagine all sorts of things inside their head and make those imaginations come true in their own world. I don't mean that you can create a whole world with your mind, but rather your mind could trick you into visualizing things differently. Could my case be one of those? I think it could. I don't think any reasonable person would dismiss such plausibility without concrete proof against it. For now, that's the best explanation I've got for what happened to me. But that doesn't make me feel any better than before, because if it were true, then it means it can happen all over again, and I don't want to experience the same thing again. After an ugly breakup with my ex-boyfriend and then getting kicked out of his house, I had packed up all of my stuff at midnight and was headed to my brother's in Idaho. I couldn't stop crying, and it wasn't because of the breakup. I was crying because I looked so pathetic. My brother warned me of my ex. He told me he knew the type and implored me to not move in with him. Well, he was right. My ex and I, we started out with a long-distance relationship. He would come see me once every month. We would spend 2 to 3 days together, then say goodbye on Sunday nights. Those brief encounters felt so special, and I genuinely thought that I was in love. Once again, my brother warned me that the feelings I felt were more due to the longing, the feeling that you get when you first experience a long-distance relationship, and that it wasn't love. After all, how much love can you feel for someone that you get to see 2 days out of the month? But yeah, I moved in with my ex and it was really nice during the first month when the business in the bedroom was still fresh and exciting. Predictably, he changed with time. Long story short, he started coming home late, got ticked off at everything, I caught him texting other girls, we had a fight, and then he kicked me out. That's the reason why I was in my crappy 2002 Toyota Camry, jam-packed with all of my stuff, and me driving as I'm crying like the complete idiot that I am. Up to that point, I had driven about 100 miles and had another 200 miles to go. Initially, I didn't notice anything odd because I was so distraught. But as I continued to rack up the miles, I began to realize that I hadn't seen an exit, towns, or even a car for at least the last 20 miles. I'm not familiar with this stretch of the road. The only time that I drove here was when I was going to my ex for the first time. Even so, isn't there a law that every stretch of the freeway is supposed to have an exit every so and so miles? I think I heard that from someone. So naturally, I was concerned. It was another I told you so moment. My brother told me to get a GPS unit if I didn't want to use up the data for my phone. I should have listened. I drove for another 2 miles or so when I finally saw a sign for an exit. A smile of relief washed over my face, but not for long. It was an empty sign. There was nothing written on it. I continued driving, but no exit came about. I wondered if this was perhaps a new road that was being built. But then if that were the case, then how could have I gotten on it? That didn't make any sense. I pulled the car over by the side of the road, then opened the Google Maps app on my cell phone. The signal was strong and the phone was functioning just fine, but it couldn't get my location down. I cleared the cache, rebooted the phone, but still nothing. That's when I saw a faint light coming from afar. It looked to be a vehicle that was coming closer, but the headlights were way too dim. As it got closer, I could tell it was a car, but not exactly the way it's supposed to look. How do I explain this? It looked semi-transparent. In fact, when it passed me by, I could see the trees across the road through the car. I even saw the rear passenger in the car looking at me. The dome light in the rear seemed to have been turned on because the person who was looking at me sort of had a luminance about him. I was freaking out because I thought I had just seen a ghost. I stepped on the gas and after about 2 minutes, I found myself doing 90 miles an hour. I took deep breaths and slowly depressed the gas pedal. Once I settled at 60 miles an hour, I began to wonder just what in the hell was happening to me. I checked Google Maps again, but still nothing. I know you're not supposed to use your cell phone while driving, but trust me, this situation should be the exception. I saw more cars along the way and they all had that strange transparency and luminosity about them. The spookiest part of the whole thing was being able to see the passengers inside. And again, they too had the transparent and luminous quality about them. I continued driving for another 2 hours. I wasn't sure at first, but after a while, it was clear the cars were getting less and less transparent and luminous. Eventually, all cars on the road looked normal, and I began to see the signs for local exits. I took one of the exits and found myself in a town that I couldn't recognize. I opened Google Maps and saw that I was 90 miles off from where I should have been. The road had gone back to being normal, and Google Maps was working again. I arrived at my brother's some 2 hours later, and that was the end of the scariest drive I've ever had. I don't know if I had been possessed by something, or if I were stuck in a glitch in the Matrix type of a situation. I'm not gonna say that I know what I got myself into, because I honestly have no clue. But this I can tell you for sure. The transparent and luminous cars and people that I saw, those weren't the product of my imagination. I saw them and they were real. This was maybe some 20 years ago when I was still working on the field for a real estate development company. We had built an entire neighborhood with businesses already signed up to occupy the shops, 60% of homes already sold, and we were right about finalizing some adjustments and repairs before the grand opening. I was 31 years old at the time, if I remember it correctly. I had been married for 2 years, and my wife and I were expecting our first child in 3 months. It was an exciting time for me. I was fast moving up the ranks within the company. I was given more responsibilities, better pay, and just overall, everything was looking up. On a Sunday afternoon, I wanted to show Chelsea, my wife, my first ever spearheaded project. Communication was and still is the biggest strength in our relationship. We always spoke of everything and planned for all things together. Therefore, she knew exactly where I was within the company at the present time and where I felt I would be in, say, 10 years down the road. But this last project, I never had the chance to show it to her in person. A huge chunk of my time was dedicated to my job and my job only. And for Chelsea, she was also very taken overseeing the building of our new home. As a former architect herself, she had a very specific design in mind. I had some input in the design, but for the most part, our home was designed exactly how Chelsea envisioned. We had 3 kids in that house. 1 is in college right now and 2 are still in high school. Yeah, we still live there and hopefully we'll never have to move. In any event, I arrived at the empty and newly built neighborhood first. Chelsea was running late due to some unexpected traffic on the way. She was driving from her mom's, my mother-in-law was under the weather, and my wife had dropped in to check on her. It was around 12:40 p.m. when I began to notice the sky getting darker than it should be around that time. If it were the clouds blocking the sunlight, there would have been nothing strange about that. But the sky was pretty clear. There were only a few patches of small clouds, and the weather forecast didn't mention anything about rain either. So when I say getting darker, I mean that it seemed almost as if someone had a dimmer switch for the sun, and they were slowly dimming the lights. And that, in my book, is freaking weird as hell. Call it an intuition or fear, whatever you'd like, but right off the bat, I had a bad feeling about the whole situation. I called Chelsea and told her to go home instead of coming here. My car was parked some 5 blocks away. I was taking a stroll around the neighborhood because I got bored while waiting for Chelsea. As I was walking toward my car to drive out of the neighborhood, I noticed a ring of fog had surrounded the town and it was spreading fast inward. I had never seen fogs moving at such speed. That was strange, but it wasn't the only strange thing about it. The thing is, I was seeing something similar to lightning going off within the fogs. Have you ever seen something like that? I've never even heard about it. I felt uneasy, and that's putting it lightly. I began jogging toward my car instead of walking. By that point, the fog had already enveloped the entire neighborhood, and I could hardly see a couple of yards ahead of me. I slowed my steps because I didn't want to trip on anything. But then a ball of light appeared out of nowhere. A good number of them could be seen just seconds later, and they looked to be electrified. They weren't just lights, but more along the line of clumps of energy. To make it easy to understand, search for ball of energy images online. Now imagine those balls of energy freely moving about as if they've got a mind of their own. If that doesn't freak you out, you'd be my number 1 choice as my bodyguard. It looked dangerous. I mean, if what I'm seeing is what I think it is, then it could turn me into a roasted human in a split of a second. So I instinctively ran toward the nearest house and took shelter there. I may be wrong about this, but it seemed like the balls of energy were reacting to my movement. I heard a loud metallic whining sound when I was running toward the house. I looked outside the window and all I could see were lights everywhere inside the thick fog. I could see more of them as the seconds ticked by, and as a result, they were getting closer to the house I was taking shelter in. However, I couldn't figure one thing out for certain. I didn't know if they were getting closer because their numbers were growing, or if perhaps they were coming closer to me specifically, or is it both? Whatever the case may be, I had a choice to make. Do I make a run for it to my car, or do I stay in this house and hope that these thin walls could protect me? The choice became much easier to make when I began to see the fog leaking through the tiny space between the door and the frame. This was not a fog. There were so many of those balls of lights in front of the house by that point. So I ran toward the back door, checked outside through the window, and saw that the coast was clear. I ran for my life, and I mean that literally. As I was running through the thick fog, it became clear that the lights were all headed toward the house I was staying in. All other places were relatively free of them, but the house was lit up like a Christmas tree. I got to my car shortly thereafter. I started it, but I had to drive slowly. I could hardly see anything in front of me, and the last thing I wanted was to junk my car in the middle of this fog. I drove in the opposite direction of the house and the balls of lights. As I drove further and further away, the fogs began to thin and I could see much better. It took about 3 minutes to drive out of the fog, but I drove for another minute before I stopped to put a fair distance between me and the lights. I got out of the car and looked toward the neighborhood. The fogs were disappearing incredibly fast. In fact, by the time I was looking at them, about half the town was already free of the fogs and most of the lights had disappeared too. I got home safely and no experience like that had repeated in my life. At least so far so good. As for the neighborhood, we sold all the houses in 3 years of time. Most of the businesses do fairly well there, and my company deemed it a success. My own house is only half an hour drive from there. I went there from time to time out of the sheer curiosity for what might have really happened to me on that fateful day. I've heard of rumors from the town folks about witnessing strange apparitions and seeing bright lights appearing in the middle of the night. I'm not talking about artificial lights like headlights from a car, but rather lights appearing from out of the thin air. I did some digging on the history of the land, and as it turns out, it might be a burial site of a long-lost Native American tribe. I say it might be because the historical data on it isn't precise. There's a clue that the burial site could be located nearby the neighborhood, but then it could also be that the town's sitting right on top of the burial ground. I took a weekend and drove 400 miles to speak to a Native American chief who was willing to speak to me on the subject. He told me what I saw weren't balls of lights, but in fact, they were manifestation of spirits in the form of energy. He assured me that the spirits were gentle based on my encounter with them. Spirits are no different from people. They all have different temperaments and as well as group mentality if they have been parts of the same group when they were alive. It is likely that the spirits I saw were parts of a peaceful and tolerant tribe. That's why they didn't harm me on my first and only encounter with them, and that is also the reason why the neighborhood lives in relative peace. I was told that there wasn't much that I could do to make the situation better or worse. The people in the neighborhood sure could make things worse, but the chief didn't believe that would happen, seeing as how the last 20 years had been trouble-free. And that was it. We shared a pint at a local bar, said goodbye after 2 hours of talk. I stayed at a motel overnight, then left to home the next morning. All's been good in the neighborhood ever since, and I'm grateful for that. I feel responsible for the peaceful coexistence between the living and the dead of the town. After all, I had spearheaded the development of the town from start to finish. I don't have much knowledge in the Native American rituals. I've tried to study it, but the spiritual ceremonies differ from tribe to tribe. So in order to not offend any spirits out of my ignorance, I've decided that it was best I honor them in the ways that I'm familiar with. So today, I often go to the hills near the town and leave a bouquet of flowers and say a few words of gratitude for their peaceful ways. These people have been robbed and butchered by the colonists, and they are yet to find peace in the afterlife due to our unstoppable thirst for expansion. I think a little tribute in their honor is the least we can do, dead or alive. About 3 months ago, I was in the subway waiting for a train at around 3 in the morning. That's not the time I normally take the trains, but I was there that late because I had a huge fight with my boyfriend. I told him I was going to leave. He told me to stay until sunrise, that he would sleep in the living room, but I was so pissed off that I left anyway against my better judgment. As I was waiting for the train on the platform, I began to regret not taking the taxi. I was really tight on rent that month, I could have chanced it by taking a cab, but I chickened out at the last moment. $40 doesn't sound like much to most people, but that isn't the case for someone like me who only makes $31,000 a year. Yeah, it's no fun weighing $40 of taxi fare for safety reasons versus the extra money I would have by the end of the month if I just took the subway. Life sucks at age 25. Limited work experience equals little pay. But to hold on to that crappy job, you have to live in big cities, and big cities equal high monthly rent. It's not easy being 20-something and being on your own. The train arrived before I could change my mind on the taxi. I got on it, then took a seat at the far end of the subway car. There were 5 people in the car, including myself. It's not so surprising even at those hours, seeing as how this is New York City. I moved here 2 years ago after landing a new job. When I first got here, I was really afraid of taking the subways. I thought they'd be as dirty and dangerous as most films portray them to be. But the reality was a bit different. It's dirty, but it isn't as bad as in the films. It can also be dangerous, but it's okay for the most part as long as you use common sense. I mention film portrayals of New York City subways because before coming here, I thought the lights flickering in the subway cars happened all the time. It looks really spooky in films, but that almost never happens. I've never seen it myself, but I did hear from the long-time residents that it does happen once in a blue moon. So then imagine my surprise when the lights flickering happens to me for the first time. The timing couldn't have been better to set up the next chain of events. Seconds before we made a stop at a station, the lights in the car flicker. But I'm the only person to react because everyone else in the car is sleeping. No one gets in at the station and the car continues moving. Just seconds after we depart the station, the lights begin flickering again. But this time, it's followed by a complete blackout. The car continues to move, and therefore, we haven't lost power. But the lights went out completely for about 5 seconds before they came back on. I'm definitely spooked out by this point. I look at the other passengers, and there's only one person who woke up from the lights going out. It's a woman, and she's got the same look that I probably have on my face. We make another stop, no one gets in or out. The doors close and the car continues to move. As we leave the station, the lights flicker again, and then it goes out completely. It is pitch black, and what makes it so peculiar is the fact that I can't even see the lights from the outside of the car. Though quite dim, the subway tunnels have plenty of lights. Regardless of the lights going off in the cars, outside should still have some lights, but I see nothing. I'm waiting and waiting some more for the lights to come back on, but nothing. The car continues moving, but then suddenly, I can hear the noises from the outside so clearly. The metal wheels making contact against the rail and the noise of the wind. It's almost as if the doors of the car are open. I'm not certain, but I think I can actually feel the breeze from the outside. Then I have this feeling that something's watching me. I've got my phone in my hand, but I don't have the guts to turn it on. Fear really does immobilize you. I'm glued to the chair, have my eyes closed so hard that they almost hurt, and my hands are shaking so much that I can hardly hold on to the phone. Moments later, the train comes to a stop. I open my eyes ever so slightly and notice that they have been adjusted to the dark. I can see a little bit. I can make out the objects in the cars and the outside. We are stopped at a station, but for some reason, all the lights have been turned off. Suddenly, I hear a couple of people struggling. It's the sort of sound you'd hear when a person is being dragged away against their will. It seems like they're gagged as well. I could hear them trying to scream and make some kind of sound, but the sounds coming out of them were muffled, as if their mouths were covered with something big. I can't control my body shaking from this fear that has complete reign over me. I'm sweating so much that my back feels like I'm in a shower. We are stopped at the station much longer than usual. The car should have left minutes ago, but we are still here. I could no longer hear the sound of the desperate struggle, but then I see a large black figure coming closer to me. I close my eyes again and decide that whatever that's coming for me there's no way to fight it off. It's just an excuse, of course. This is just me crumbling under the extreme fear and pressure. I feel something or someone right on top of me. I can sense it looking at me, and I'm just waiting for it to snatch me out of the car. Seconds tick by when suddenly the car begins moving again. About a minute thereafter, the lights come back on, and I see that the only passengers still on board are me and the lady who woke up when the lights flickered the second time. For some reason, only the persons awake weren't taken at the last station. The lady and I, we both get up and run toward each other. We get together in the middle of the car and hold each other's hand. She's panicking and crying uncontrollably. But then I'm doing the same. The lady struggles to speak her mind, but says, "Should we get off at the next station? What do you think we should do?" I respond, "If the lights are on, we get off. If not, I'm not so sure." We hold on to one another as if our lives depend on it. The train slows down as it gets closer to the next station. The lights flicker, we are expecting the worst. But the lights stay on when the car comes to a complete stop. You would think both of us would jump out of the car at the first sight of a normal train station. But we don't. We cautiously walk toward the door and wait there. Then suddenly the door tries to close and we both push against them, then run out of the car. The train leaves and we slowly walk toward the staircase. There's no one inside the train station and it is absolutely silent. You could literally drop a pin and hear it hit the ground crystal clear. We walk up the stairs still holding each other's hand. We should be hearing the ambient sound of the city, but neither of us can hear a thing. The lady says, "This can't be. How is it that we can't even hear the sound of cars on the streets?" We take the last few steps and surface to the street level. It is the weirdest thing ever. The sounds, and I mean all of the sounds, come back instantly as our heads get above the ground level. There isn't any type of door that separates the space between the ground level and the stairs leading to the subway level. And yet, it sounded like we were inside a soundproof box and were let out. That just isn't possible. We see a deli grocery at the corner of the streets. We walk there and call for 2 cabs. I let the lady take the first one and wait for the second one to arrive. The gentleman at the store is nice enough to let me stay inside, even though I must look like an insane person with the makeup smudged all over my face. Minutes later, the second cab arrives and I leave for home. After all that's happened tonight, I could care less about making the rent this month. I get home safely but hardly get any sleep that night. I was awake the whole night, wondering about the happenings in the subway. I began to question if I could ever take the subway again. And if so, how in the world am I going to continue making a living in this city? Well, today, that's 3 months after the happening, I still live in New York City, but I never take the subways at late hours. I didn't have much options in terms of job opportunity. So if I stay, there's always a chance that the things in the subway would get me one day. But then if I leave, the joblessness would get to me eventually. Therefore, there wasn't much of a choice I could make. Unlike most people, I don't have a family that I can depend on in times like this. My father is a drunk. Mom, I haven't seen her in ages, ever since she ran off. My brother and sister, don't even get me started with them. It's only me, and it's always been that way from the day I was born. So call me crazy or reckless, but I stay where I can make a living. There are close to 9 million people living in New York City. Aside from the mega wealthy, we live here like sardines packed in a can. There are so many people in such small space that you learn to channel things out that doesn't involve you. The fact is, a couple of people a day could go missing in the city and no one would know any better. Which makes you wonder, just how long have the kidnappings been happening? How many people have survived the event like I have but never reported the crime? I've got no plans to report the incident from that night. My only plan now is to save enough money to move out of the city, then to look for any other job that can keep me afloat until I can find something better. Just 1 more month and I'm out of here. Saturday afternoon, I was walking home after a long day at the office. There were lots of small puddles on the ground because it had been raining all day. I actually enjoy rainy days. Not the stormy ones, but the ones that gently wet the ground. The sounds of the rain relaxes you, and walking on the puddle is still fun even at the age of 23. There were only a few people on the streets. The rain had a lot to do with that, but it's also because I live in a small town. Days like this, it makes you feel like you own the town, like you are the only one living here. I'm still a kid inside, and thus my mind often runs wild with imaginations. My dad thinks I still have lots of growing up to do, but what can I say? I'm happiest when I let my mind run freely. In any event, as I walk toward home, I step on each of the puddles I see on the ground. My shoes are soaking wet, and my jeans look darker at the bottom due to the water that had been splashed on it. I'm about to step into a large puddle when I see a splash without me stepping into it. I look up in the sky for a while thinking, could it be hail? I look down again, but I see no sign of ice on the ground anywhere. Now, you might think it could have been the rain that did that, but I'm sorry to say, the splashing was a little too energetic for a drop of rain to create such motion of the water. I continue to stand there watching at the puddle, mesmerized at what I just saw. I have no clue what it was, and thus, I feel bewildered and excited at the same time. Then suddenly, I see another splashing of the water. This time, I think I know what did that. Call me crazy all you like, but there was a footstep. Only there was no person stepping into the puddle of water. Seconds thereafter, I see other puddles on the sidewalk splashing as well. It lasts perhaps for 5 seconds. Then it stops. I wait there for about 2 minutes for the puddles to splash again. If someone's watching from a window right now, they probably think that I'm crazy. Imagine a grown woman standing still on the sidewalk and staring at the ground for minutes on. Crazy is the first thing that would come to your mind. I can't say for how long, but I waited long enough and the puddle splashing didn't come back. I went home after that and nothing else strange happened since that day. I told my father about the experience and explained to him that it could have been a glitch in the Matrix phenomena. He told me that I should grow the hell up. I expected him to say as much, but let's examine the happening rationally. Like I said, the splashing was too energetic for it to be created by the rainfall. I mean, how difficult is it to differentiate rain splash versus an entire foot stepping onto a puddle? You should also discount the possibility of hails. For one, I didn't see any ice on the ground. And two, there were no mention of hails anywhere on the news that day. So then what else could it be? Aside from people from other dimension or reality crossing into ours for a brief period of time, I can't think of any other explanation. But that's just me, and you can think of my experience however you like. My girlfriend Sophia and I, we share an apartment and have been living together for about 5 years in the same place. Both of us are very organized people, and we keep our place much cleaner than most everyone we know. From my understanding, not many people enjoy that style of living, but our preference is to keep everything organized so we know exactly where to get them when we need them. For example, our kitchen's organized in different sections. We keep herbs, spices, and condiments on different levels of shelves. We've also labeled all the hooks that hold different pots and frying pans. I think you get my drift. Sophia and I are seriously a match made in heaven. It'd be really hard to find anyone else who lives like us. At any rate, we got us a brand new 4K TV about 2 months back. A refurbished unit was on sale for like half the original price. I bought a set right away and lucked out with a unit that works perfectly and looks brand new. I suggested that we should perhaps have it installed in our bedroom since we spend a lot of time watching TV there. Sophia, however, felt that a 60-inch TV would look out of place in our bedroom. I really wanted to replace our puny 30-inch panel in the bedroom. I can't for the life of me understand why she doesn't think a massive flat panel wouldn't look cool in our bedroom. Regardless, she won the argument and we kept the new TV in the living room. One night, we were getting ready to binge watch season 2 of Stranger Things on Netflix. We had to keep delaying watching the season 2 because when I had the time, Sophia didn't, and vice versa. I'm sure many working couples understand this predicament. Before we continue, allow me to explain how the living room is organized, at least the area where the TV and the couch is located. So there's the TV, and underneath it, there's a tiny computer, a PS4, a Roku that we never use because we stream Netflix using PS4, and lastly, a charging station for my PS4 controllers are all the way at the bottom. In front of the couch, we have a fairly large coffee table. There, we have 2 laptop cooling pads at all times because we tend to work on the couch quite often. We also have a small box where we keep all the remotes for the TV and Roku, and we keep the PS4 media remote there as well. So what I'm trying to point out is that everything is organized and we know exactly where to find all the items in the living room. Now, let's continue with the story. Sophia and we turned the TV on and begin streaming the first episode of 2nd season. Our couch has an armrest that can be pulled down exactly how you would in the backseat of a car. That comes down unless we are watching a horror film. Sophia likes to sit right next to me when we watch something scary. But Stranger Things doesn't scare her much, so we keep the armrest down. I mentioned that because when the armrest is down, we keep the remotes in the cup holder during our viewing session. Again, I make it sound like we are a couple of pain-in-the-butt people to hang out with, but this is just the way we are at home. I promise we don't force our guests to do the same. But yeah, we continue binging on the show and we are at episode 3, when I realized the TV remote is no longer in the cup holder. I ask Sophia, "Hey, did you take the remote?" And she goes, "No, why would I?" So then I ask her to pause the show and begin rummaging around in search of the remote. I look everywhere in the living room, but I can't find the remote. I expand the search area to the bathroom, bedroom, and the kitchen. I've spent the last 20 minutes in search of the remote. I don't know why, but I hate it when I can't find something that should be readily available. I think I have to come to terms that indeed, I can be a real pain in the butt to live with. Anyhow, God knows how and why, but I find the remote in the kitchen on top of our dining table. I call for Sophia and both of us are completely befuddled. We were glued to the couch for the duration of the 2 full episodes and the beginning of episode 3. I promise you neither of us had gone to the kitchen or even the bathroom. I look at Sophia with a dumbfounded look on my face and say, "You and I were both seated on the couch this whole time. I know this and you know it as well. How in the hell did this remote end up in the kitchen?" Sophia laughs and goes, "The ghost, maybe?" "Hey, I'm not kidding," I respond irritatingly. Seconds later, as I'm holding the remote, we both see what I could only describe as it withering in my hand. I'm not saying that the remote broke down in small pieces, nor am I saying that there are pieces of the remote on the floor, but it looked to be slowly disappearing in my hand on atom by atom. I let go of the remote as it's disappearing, but it doesn't drop on the floor. Instead, it's just gone. I rub my hands together to make sure I'm okay. The hand that was grabbing onto the remote feels and looks fine. All the while, Sophia's looking at me, but she can't say a word. She's literally at a loss for words. We don't utter a single word and almost simultaneously turn around to go back to the living room. We take a few steps into the living room, then stop. I see the black tip of the remote poking out of the cup holder. It wasn't there when I began the search for it. I began the search because it wasn't there in the first place. Sophia saw that the remote wasn't there, and I saw it as well. So there's 2 people who saw the same thing, but the damn thing's right there in the cup holder. I have goosebumps on my arms, chills running down my spine, and I've got this sudden urge to regurgitate everything I had for dinner. The binge watching stopped right there and then. We hardly got any sleep that night and pretty much spent the whole night discussing about what we had seen. Aside from maybe temporary insanity, there's just no way to logically explain the incidents of that night. That's also why we haven't told of this to anyone, not even to our families. We still live in the same apartment, and last night I saw 2 TV screens where there should have been only 1. Picture yourself watching Stranger Things on TV, then suddenly a football match is projected on top of the show you're watching. I stopped the show and went to the menu, but the football continued to be projected on top. The looks of it was almost as if a holographic image was layered on top of the TV set. It stopped after about 10 seconds, and unfortunately, Sophia wasn't there to back up my story. It didn't matter though, since she believed me. She told me that she had seen a woman taking a shower in our bathroom and that she looked exactly the same as her. So essentially, she saw herself showering, or should I say a different version of herself. Who knows, this could be the result of two crazy people living under the same roof. But I don't think so. I think there could be something in this location that connects two different realities on certain occasions. And if that's the case, then perhaps it's time that we move out of this apartment. The last thing I want is for our belongings, or in fact, for us to get stuck in a different reality. Could it happen? Only God would know. But let's just say that I don't want to test the hypothesis. The easiest way out of this conundrum is to remove ourselves from this location. Then pray to God that the phenomena doesn't follow us.